Hey guys, in today's video I'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. My name is Jake, and I've been a park ranger here at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for almost 10 years. You think you know a place after that long, every trail, every creek, every hidden hollow. But the Smokies, they have a way of reminding you that some things remain unknown, lurking just beyond the veil of the familiar. Elk Month, that's where it started. A beautiful area, once a logging town, now a ghost town nestled deep within the park. Tourists love it for the history, the old home slowly being reclaimed by nature. I appreciated it for the quiet, a break from the crowds closer to Gatlinburg and Cherokee. It was late fall, the leaves mostly down, leaving the woods stark and open. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I was on a routine patrol, checking the old Appalachian clubhouse for any signs of vandalism. Elkmont can get eerie even in broad daylight, the silence heavy, broken only by the rustling wind and the occasional call of a bird. But this day, it was different. There was a whisper, faint, almost indistinct, like the wind sighing through the empty window frames of the old houses. At first, I dismissed it. The Smokies are full of sounds that play tricks on your ears, but it persisted, a low, murmuring sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stopped by the old event cabin, its porch overlooking the little river. The whisper was clearer here, weaving itself into the sound of the water rushing over the rocks. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the river. It was something else, something unsettling. It sounded like voices, but not quite. Mumbled, distorted, like words spoken backwards or underwater. I strained my ears, trying to decipher any recognizable sound, any hint of meaning. But it was just a constant, low drone. A chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the woods themselves. I checked the clubhouse, found nothing out of place, but the whispers followed me. They were there when I walked past the Levy Trentham cabin, and they were louder still near the old Elkmont cemetery, their faint murmurs seeming to rise from the weathered tombstones themselves. By the time I finished my patrol, the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. The whispers hadn't stopped, and a cold unease had settled in my gut. It was more than just the usual spookiness of Elkmont at dusk. This was something different, something wrong. As I walked back to my truck, the whispers seemed to coalesce, to form something almost intelligible. Just for a moment, I thought I heard a word, clear as a bell amidst the drone. Watch. Then it was gone, swallowed back into the murmuring chorus of the woods. I stood there frozen, the hair on the back of my neck prickling. Watch. Watch what? The silence returned, heavier now, pregnant with an unspoken dread. The woods seemed to hold their breath, listening, waiting. And in that silence, I knew one thing for sure: whatever was whispering in Elkmont, it was not the wind, and it was not friendly. The next day, the whispers were still on my mind. I tried to rationalize its stress, fatigue, maybe even some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by the quiet and the isolation. But deep down, I knew it was real. Too real. I decided to head back to Elkmont, this time with a purpose. If there was something strange going on, I wanted to document it. I grabbed one of the park's trail cameras, the kind we use to monitor wildlife, and headed out. My plan was simple. Set up the camera in Elkmont, leave it overnight, and see if it captured anything unusual. I chose a spot near the old cemetery. The whispers had been strongest there, and the atmosphere was undeniably charged. I found a sturdy oak tree overlooking the tombstones, strapped the camera to its trunk, and made sure it was pointed towards the clearing. I set it to motion detection, hoping to catch whatever was making those unsettling sounds. Setting up the camera in the deepening twilight felt different this time. The usual peaceful solitude of Elkmont was replaced by a palpable sense of dread. The whispers were back, softer than before, but undeniably present, a constant undercurrent to the rustling leaves and the distant murmur of the river. They seemed to be watching me now. As darkness fell, I retreated, leaving the camera as my silent sentinel in the woods. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of my cabin, every rustle outside, sounded like those whispers, amplified, distorted. I kept replaying that single word in my head. Watch, trying to make sense of it. But it remained an unsettling fragment, a piece of a puzzle I couldn't even begin to assemble. The next morning, I was back in Elkmont before sunrise. The air was cold, the ground frosted, and a thick mist clung to the valley, shrouding the old houses in an eerie shroud. The whispers were faint, almost lost in the morning stillness, but they were there. My heart pounded as I approached the oak tree. The trail camera was still there, undisturbed. I carefully unstrapped it, switched it off, and headed back to my truck, eager to see what it had captured. Back at the ranger station, I plugged the camera into my computer and downloaded the files. Hours of nothing. Just wind rustling the leaves, squirrels scampering across the clearing, the occasional deer wandering through the tombstones. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing whispering. Disappointment gnawed at me. Had I imagined it all? Was it just my mind playing tricks? I was about to delete the files when I noticed something. One short video clip, timestamped around 3:07 a.m. I hadn't noticed it before, buried amongst the longer, uneventful clips. I clicked play. Static, just snow and static flickering across the screen. Then the static cleared, and the image sharpened. It was the cemetery clearing, just as the camera should have captured it. But something was wrong. The mist in the video was thicker, swirling, almost alive. And in the center of the clearing, something moved. A shape, indistinct and shadowy, but definitely there, shifting and swaying in the mist. It was too tall to be a deer, too slender to be a bear. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong. Distorted, elongated, like a figure stretched and pulled out a shape. And then the whispers started, not from my speakers, but from the video itself. Faint at first, then growing louder, a chorus of distorted voices rising from the mist-shrouded clearing. The shadowy figure swayed, as if conducting the eerie symphony. The whispers intensified, becoming a guttural drone, and then, just for a second, the image cleared again. The shadowy figure was closer now, its form momentarily solidifying in the mist, and I saw it. A face, or something that resembled a face, pale, elongated, with eyes that were too large, too wide, and empty. Holes in the darkness, staring directly at the camera. Staring directly at me. Then the video cut out, returning to static. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I stared at the screen, frozen. The image of that face burned into my mind. It was real. It was there, in Elkmont, and it was watching. Sleep was impossible that night. The image from the trail camera video, that face, was seared into my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, those empty, staring holes in the mist. The whispers echoed in my mind, no longer just a background murmur, but a tangible presence, a chilling soundtrack to my waking nightmare. I knew I couldn't ignore it. Dismissing it as hallucination was no longer an option. Something was happening in Elkmont, something unnatural, and as a park ranger, it was my duty to investigate, no matter how much my gut screamed at me to stay away. The next morning, fueled by coffee and a grim determination, I prepared to return to Elkmont. This time I wasn't going unarmed. I grabbed my standard issue sidearm, a heavy flashlight, and a handheld radio. I also packed a more advanced digital recorder, hoping to capture the whispers more clearly than the trail camera's audio had. The drive to Elkmont was agonizingly slow. The park seemed different now, tainted by the knowledge of what lurked within its shadowed valleys. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounded like the whispers, closer now, more insistent. Elkmont was shrouded in mist again, thicker than before, clinging to the ground like a living entity. The air was heavy, still, and the usual forest sounds were muted, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt more menacing than peaceful. The whispers were there, of course, a constant, low hum that vibrated in my bones. I parked near the trailhead and stepped out into the mist. It was cold, damp, and carried a strange, almost metallic scent. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the whispers, which seemed to emanate from the mist itself, swirling around me like invisible tendrils. I walked slowly towards the cemetery, my hand resting on the butt of my sidearm. The digital recorder was running, clipped to my vest, capturing the ambient sounds. Or hopefully more than just ambient sounds. The closer I got to the cemetery, the stronger the feeling of unease became. The mist thickened, visibility dropping to near zero. The whispers intensified, growing louder, more distinct, no longer just a murmur, but a chorus of voices just beyond the edge of comprehension. I reached the oak tree where I had placed the trail camera. The spot felt colder, somehow the air itself seeming to chill my skin. I scanned the clearing, my flashlight beam cutting through the mist, but saw nothing. Just the weathered tombstones shrouded in the swirling vapor. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding weak and thin in the oppressive silence. "Is anyone there?" Only the whispers answered. They seemed to shift, to coalesce around my voice, as if mocking my attempt at communication. They grew louder, faster, a torrent of distorted syllables that seemed to claw at my sanity. Then, amidst the drone, I heard it again. A word, clear as a bell, cutting through the unintelligible murmur. Closer. The word echoed in the mist, hanging in the air like a physical presence. Closer, clear to what? Closer to me. A cold dread washed over me. I felt eyes on me, unseen but undeniably present, watching from the swirling mist. The whispers were not just sounds, they were a warning, a prelude. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam sweeping across the cemetery. The mist shifted, parted momentarily, and for a fleeting instant, I saw it again. The shadowy figure, standing amongst the tombstones, taller now, more defined, its pale, elongated face turned towards me. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching, its empty eyes burning into mine. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting. Panic seized me, cold and paralyzing. I wanted to run, to flee back to my truck, back to the safety of the ranger station, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure in the mist held me captive, its empty gaze a suffocating weight. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it began to glide towards me, its shadowy form flowing through the mist like smoke. The whispers intensified, rising to a deafening crescendo, a cacophony of distorted voices that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I raised my sidearm, my hand shaking, and pointed it at the advancing figure. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Stay back." But the figure didn't stop. It continued to glide forward, its pace unhurried, relentless. The mist swirled around it, obscuring its form, then parting again, revealing glimpses of its elongated limbs, its distorted torso, that horrifying, empty face. The whispers became clearer now, no longer just a drone, but fragmented words, sentences swirling around me like physical entities. "Yours. Come. Watch. Forever." They were invitations, promises, threats. They spoke a joining, of watching, of eternity in this mist-shrouded valley. And in their tone, I heard a chilling hunger, a desperate yearning to pull me into their world. I fired. The gunshot echoed through the silent woods, shattering the oppressive stillness. The bullet struck the figure, or at least where I thought its chest should be. The shadowy form flickered, momentarily distorted, but it didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. My heart plummeted. Bullets had no effect. This thing, whatever it was beyond the reach of conventional weapons. I was out of options. Desperation surged through me, overriding my fear. If bullets wouldn't work, maybe light would. I switched on my flashlight, aiming the powerful beam directly at the figure. The light struck it, illuminating the mist around it, momentarily dispelling the shadows clinging to its form. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. It was tall, impossibly so, its limbs elongated and spindly, its torso gaunt and stretched. Its skin was pale, translucent, almost like parchment stretched over bone. And its face of the face was even more horrifying up close. Those eyes, those empty holes, were not just dark. They seemed to absorb the light, to swallow it whole. And around its mouth, a faint, chilling smile stretched across its elongated features. The whispers faltered, momentarily silenced by the light. The figure recoiled slightly, its shadowy form flickering, as if the light was burning it. Hope flared within me, a fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. I kept the flashlight beam focused on the figure, backing away slowly, keeping my sidearm raised. "Stay back," I repeated, my voice stronger now, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate will to survive. "Stay away from me." The figure hissed, a low, rasping sound that seemed to tear through the mist. It raised a long, skeletal hand, shielding its eyes from the light. It hesitated, its advance momentarily stalled. I pressed my advantage, continuing to back away, keeping the light focused on the figure. The whispers receding with every step. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a tombstone, falling to the ground. The flashlight flew from my hand, skittering across the frosty ground, the beam swinging wildly, then settling, pointing away from the figure. Darkness descended again, thick and suffocating. The whispers returned, louder than ever, triumphant, hungry. I scrambled back to my feet, fumbling for the flashlight in the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, a new sound cut through the whispers. A sound I recognized, a sound of the human world, intruding upon this nightmare valley. The sound of an engine approaching fast. Headlights cut through the mist, illuminating the cemetery clearing. It was my truck. Park security must have realized I was overdue, sent someone to check on me. Salvation. The figure hissed again, a sound of frustrated rage. It turned away from me, melting back into the mist, its shadowy form dissolving into the swirling vapor. The whispers faded, receding into the distance, leaving behind only the sound of the approaching truck and the pounding of my heart. By the time park security reached me, the figure was gone. The mist was still thick, the silence still heavy, but the oppressive dread had lifted, replaced by a bone, deep exhaustion, and a chilling certainty. I tried to explain what happened, about the whispers, the figure in the mist, the face from the trail camera video. They listened, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a mixture of concern and disbelief. They searched the cemetery, found nothing out of the ordinary, just mist and tombstones and the lingering scent of damp earth. They chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, the isolation of the job. They recommended I take some time off, maybe see a park psychologist. I didn't argue. What could I say? How could I explain what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had felt in that mist-shrouded valley? I took their advice. I took time off. I saw the psychologist. I even tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, a product of stress and an overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something is out there in Elkmont, in the heart of the Smokies. Something ancient, something hungry, something that whispers in the mist and watches from the shadows. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the trees outside my cabin, I swear I can still hear them. The whispers of elk, and I know with chilling certainty that they are still watching, still waiting, and one day they will call again, and someone somewhere will answer. The Appalachian Trail snaked through the dense woods of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a ribbon of pale earth barely visible beneath the thick canopy. My name is Ranger Jack Harding, and this is my domain. For 15 years, I patrolled these trails, a solitary figure in a green uniform against a backdrop of ancient trees and whispering streams. People call me a park ranger, but some days I feel more like a guardian, watching over something old and wild that most folks can't even begin to understand. I'm not your typical granola munching, tree hugging ranger. Don't get me wrong, I respect nature, but I also respect its teeth. The Smokies aren't some manicured garden, they're raw, untamed wilderness. Black bears roam free, coyotes howl in the valleys, and the mountains themselves seem to breathe with a life of their own. And then there are the stories, the whispers in the wind that the locals tell, tales of things older than the park, things that watch from the shadows. I usually dismiss them as folklore, the kind of yarns spun around campfires to spook tourists. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the silence of the woods presses down, even I, a seasoned ranger, can feel a prickle of unease. It's a feeling like being watched. A sense that something is just beyond the edge of the firelight, something that doesn't belong in the neat little boxes of our understanding. This feeling was particularly strong last fall. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a change in the air pressure before a storm. Trails that were usually bustling with hikers became eerily quiet. Animals grew skittish, their calls echoing with a frantic edge. And then the disappearances started. At first, it was just hikers who wandered off trail, the kind of incidents that happen every year. But these were different. No trace, no scent, just gone. Like they'd been swallowed by the mountains themselves. The Park Service launched searches, of course. Helicopters buzzed overhead, search dogs strained at their leashes, and volunteers combed the undergrowth. We found nothing. It was as if the missing had simply ceased to exist. The official reports blamed accidents, disorientation, animal attacks, anything to avoid the real, unspoken fear that was beginning to grip the park. I tried to stay grounded in logic, to find rational explanations. But the woods had a different story to tell. A story whispered in the rustling leaves, etched in the deepening shadows, and carried on the chilling wind that snaked through the valleys. A story that was about to become terrifyingly real. The first truly unsettling incident happened on the Chimney Tops Trail, one of the park's most popular hikes. A young couple, eager to catch the sunrise, had set out before dawn. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped, the kind who leave detailed itineraries and stick to the marked paths. Yet they vanished. Their abandoned car was found at the trailhead parking lot, still locked, backpacks and water bottles inside. Search teams scoured the chimney tops, rappelling down cliffs, pushing through rhododendron thickets, calling out their names until their voices were hoarse. Nothing. It was as if they had evaporated into the morning mist. Then came the video. A solo hiker, a tech-obsessed kid from Knoxville, had been live streaming his trek on YouTube. He was aiming for Clingman's Dome, the highest point in the park, and had his phone mounted on a chest strap, capturing his every breath and stumble. His stream was popular, attracting a few dozen viewers who peppered him with questions and encouragement in the chat. I reviewed the footage myself, along with a few other rangers, hoping for a clue, anything that could explain the disappearances. For the first few hours, it was mundane hiker stuff, scenic vistas, panting breaths, the crunch of boots on the trail. Then, as he climbed higher, things started to change. The air grew colder, even for late autumn. A thick fog, unnatural in its suddenness, rolled in, swallowing the sunlight and turning the vibrant forest into a monochrome world of gray and shadow. The hiker, oblivious or perhaps too engrossed in his stream, kept going, his cheerful chatter faltering slightly as the visibility dropped to near zero. And then it appeared, just a flicker at the edge of the frame, a fleeting distortion in the fog. Something tall, impossibly thin, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. It was there for less than a second, a ghost in the static, before vanishing back into the mist. The hiker, thankfully, didn't seem to notice. He kept walking, his breath clouding in the frigid air, narrating his now spooky surroundings to his viewers. But we saw it. We rewound the footage, played it in slow motion, zoomed in until the pixels blurred. There it was, undeniable, a shape that defied easy explanation. It wasn't an animal, wasn't human, not quite. It was wrong. Too elongated, too spindly. Its movements too disjointed. It was like something from a nightmare, a creature assembled from spare parts in the dark corners of the woods. We debated what it could be. A beer, distorted by the fog and camera angle. A prank, mass hysteria, but none of it fit. The shape, the way it moved, the sheer wrongness of it had chilled us to the bone. We tried to contact the hiker, to warn him, but it was too late. His live stream abruptly cut out a few minutes after the sighting. Static filled the screen, then nothing. He was gone, just like the couple on chimney tops, vanished without a trace. The video, that fleeting glimpse of the impossible, became our grim secret. We buried it in official reports, labeled it as unidentified anomaly, and locked it away in digital archives. The Park Service, desperate to avoid panic, doubled down on the accidental disappearances narrative. But we rangers, the ones who knew the woods, we knew better. We had seen something in that fog, something that defied logic and reason. And we knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in our guts, that whatever it was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the Great Smoky Mountains, and it was hungry. After the hiker vanished on Clingman's Dome, a palpable dread settled over the park. The remaining hikers, sensing the shift in atmosphere, thinned out. Trails that were once bustling with chatter and laughter became eerily silent. Even the birds seemed to sing with less enthusiasm, their melodies muted, hesitant. We rangers were on edge, jumpy at every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig. We started patrolling in pairs, our radios crackling with nervous updates. Flashlights cut through the deepening twilight, but the darkness felt deeper, more oppressive than usual, as if the shadows themselves were watching us. The disappearances continued, though less frequently now. People were staying away, heeding the unspoken warnings carried on the wind. Those who did venture into the woods were seasoned locals, hunters and trappers who knew the mountains like the backs of their hands. They were armed, cautious, and deeply superstitious. It was one of these locals, Old Man Jedidiah, who brought us the first concrete clue. Jedidiah was a mountain man through and through, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by sun and wind, his eyes sharp and knowing as a hawk's. He'd been trapping fox in the back country, miles from any marked trail, when he found it. He stumbled upon a clearing, a small, unnatural circle in the dense woods where the trees seemed to lean away as if repelled. In the center of the clearing, nestled amongst the fallen leaves, was a structure. Crude, unsettling, built from branches and scavenged bones. It was like a grotesque mockery of a bird's nest, but far too large and imbued with a sense of wrongness that made Jedidiah's skin crawl. He didn't touch it. Jedidiah wasn't a fool. He recognized the signs, the subtle disturbances in the natural order that spoke of something ancient and malevolent. He marked the location on his map, his hand trembling slightly, and hiked straight to the ranger station. When Jedidia described the structure, a chill ran through the room. We knew instinctively that this was connected to the disappearances. We organized an expedition, a small, heavily armed team of rangers, with Jedidia as our guide. The hike to the clearing was oppressive. The woods seemed to close in around us, the air thick and stagnant. An unnatural silence hung heavy, broken only by the frantic thump of our own hearts. Even Jedidia, usually stoic and unflappable, was visibly unnerved, his eyes darting nervously into the shadows. We found the clearing exactly as he described. The structure was even more disturbing up close. The bones were animal bones, mostly deer and bear, but some were too delicate, too slender to be from any creature we recognized. They were interwoven with branches, lashed together with strips of bark, and something that looked disturbingly like dried sinew. As we circled the structure, examining it with a mixture of morbid fascination and growing horror, we heard it, a sound. Faint at first, barely audible above the rustling leaves, but growing steadily louder. A whisper. Not human, not animal, but something in between. A sibilant, breathy murmur that seemed to slither through the trees, wrapping around us like icy tendrils. The whisper spoke no words we could understand, but its tone was unmistakable. Hunger, patience, and a cold, ancient malice that promised something terrible was coming. The whisper intensified, swirling around us in the clearing, a chilling caress that raised goosebumps on our skin even through our thick ranger uniforms. We drew our weapons, adrenaline surging, our training kicking, and despite the primal fear that threatened to overwhelm us, Jedidia, his face pale but resolute, pointed deeper into the woods. "It's close," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the whispering wind. "Closer than you think." We moved as a unit, rangers flanking Jedidia, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive gloom. The whispering grew louder, morphing into a chorus of sibilant sounds, like dry leaves skittering across stone, or bones rattling in the wind. The trees seemed to writhe and twist in the periphery, their shadows dancing with unnatural animation. Then we saw it. Not a flicker this time, not a fleeting glimpse, but the thing itself standing at the edge of the clearing, framed by the gnarled branches of an ancient oak. It was taller than any man, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and spindly like a grotesque marionette. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over sharp angles and jutting bones. And its face, it had no face, not as we understood it. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin, broken only by two dark, gaping holes that served as eyes. Eyes that burned with a cold, predatory light fixed on us with an unnerving intensity. The creature moved, unfolding itself from the shadows with a jerky, disjointed grace that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. It glided towards us, its limbs moving in ways that defied human anatomy, its featureless face tilted slightly as if listening to the whispers that seemed to emanate from its very being. We opened fire. The woods erupted with the deafening roar of shotguns and rifles, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. Bullets ripped through the trees, tearing bark and shredding leaves. But the creature, it seemed to flow through the gunfire, its movements too swift, too erratic to track. It closed the distance with terrifying speed, the whispering intensifying into a deafening shriek that clouded our minds, a sound that spoke of ancient hunger and bottomless malice. Rangers fell screaming, clawing at their faces, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. The creature moved among us, a pale blur in the chaos, its touch leaving behind a trail of broken bodies and shattered minds. I emptied my magazine, the recoil slamming into my shoulder, but it was like shooting at smoke. The bullets passed through it, around it, seemingly without effect. It was immune to our weapons, impervious to our attacks. This was something beyond bullets and steel, something ancient and primordial, a creature of nightmare made flesh. Jedidia, his eyes wide with terror and a strange, grim resignation, grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Ranger," he yelled over the cacophony, "we can't fight it. It's the hunger and the fog. We have to run." He was right. We were outmatched, outgunned, facing something that defied all logic and reason. Survival was our only option. We turned and fled, scrambling back through the woods, the creature's shrieking whispers echoing behind us, urging us on, promising a fate worse than death. We ran until we burst from the trees, stumbling into the relative safety of the ranger station, our lungs burning, our hearts pounding, our minds reeling from the horror we had witnessed. Half our team was gone, lost to the creature in the woods. Jedediah, his face etched with a grief that went beyond words, simply shook his head. "It'll keep hunting," he murmured, his voice hollow. "The mountains are hungry, and they won't be satisfied for long." The disappearances stopped after that. Not because the creature was gone, but because no one dared to enter the woods anymore. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, once a haven of natural beauty, became a place of fear, a silent, haunted wilderness where the whispers of the hungry fog still echo in the trees. And we rangers, the few who survived, we are left to guard the edges, to warn people away, to live with the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows, waiting for the fog to roll in again. This is Ranger Jack Harding signing off. And if you ever find yourself hiking in the Smokies, and the fog starts to thicken, and you hear whispers on the wind turn back, don't look back. Just run. Because some things in this world are best left undisturbed, and some hungers are never truly satisfied. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Leaving the city behind, trading sirens for silence, that was the dream anyway. When I got the job as a park ranger in Redwood National Park, California, it felt like everything was falling into place. Towering redwood trees, misty trails, the Pacific coast nearby, nature was calling, and I was answering. My first assignment: patrol the Shadow Creek Trail area. Remote, they said. Peaceful, they promised. Driving it on that winding park road, sunlight filtering through the colossal trees, I almost believed them. Almost. But as I got closer to the ranger station, a different feeling started creeping in. The air grew heavy, the sunlight seemed to dim even under the giant redwoods, and a thick silence settled over everything. It wasn't the peaceful silence of nature, it was expectant, like the forest was holding its breath. The ranger station itself was a small, old cabin tucked away in a clearing. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin gray thread against the green canopy. Standing outside, leaning against a porch railing, was Ranger Morales. She was older, maybe late 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that looked like they'd seen a few things. She didn't smile when I pulled up. "You must be the new guy," she said, her voice gravelly, like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Alex, right?" I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Yeah, Alex Walker." "First day," she just grunted, glancing at the sky, which was starting to look bruised with approaching clouds. "Road's clear now. Won't be for long. Weather here changes on a dime. Redwood weather." "Right," I said, feeling a little awkward. I expected a warmer welcome, maybe some friendly advice. "Come on in," she finally said, pushing open the cabin door. Inside, the station was basic: a couple of desks, a radio setup, a kitchen corner, and the smell of wood smoke, and something else, is something faintly metallic, like old pennies. Another ranger was inside, sitting at a desk by the window, staring out at the trees. He was younger, maybe my age, with intense, dark eyes and a quiet stillness about him. Morales didn't introduce us right away. Morales gestured to a large map spread out on a table. "This is your area. Shadow Creek Trail and the surrounding woods. Patrol for anything out of place: illegal camping, fire hazards, injured hikers, wildlife trouble, usual ranger stuff." She pointed to a section of the map, a dense green patch marked Shadow Creek Wilderness. "Mostly quiet, but it gets visitors. Trails popular, especially on weekends. Just keep an eye on things. And him." I asked, nodding towards the ranger by the window. Murrells glanced over. "That's Ben. Ben Carter. He's been here a while." Her tone was vague, like she didn't want to elaborate. Ben didn't even look up, still staring out the window. I decided to introduce myself anyway. "Hey Ben, Alex Walker. Good to meet you." Ben finally turned, his dark eyes fixing on me. There was something unsettling in his gaze, like he was looking right through me. "Welcome to Shadow Creek," he said, his voice low and flat, devoid of any warmth. Then he turned back to the window, dismissing me. Morals cleared her throat, bringing my attention back to the map. Shadow Creek Trail is about 10 miles long, loops around. Good mix of terrain. You'll get to know it. "Anything specific I should be looking out for?" I asked, trying to get a sense of what wildlife trouble might mean in Redwood National Park. "Bears. Mountain lions." Morales hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Just be aware. This forest, it's old. Things happen out here. Things. I prompted, sensing she wasn't telling me everything. She sighed, rubbing her hand over her tired eyes. Look, kid, Redwood's beautiful, but it's also wild. Respect it. Stick to the trails, especially after dark. And if you hear something that doesn't sound like it belongs, just keep moving. Her words hung in the air, heavy and vague. Before I could ask her to explain, the radio crackled to life, and she turned to answer it, her attention already elsewhere. My first few patrols were uneventful. The trail was beautiful, sunlight dappling through the ancient trees, the air cool and damp. Hikers were friendly, mostly families and older couples enjoying the scenery. I saw deer, squirrels, birds, the usual forest wildlife. But even in the daytime, there was an undercurrent of unease. The silence was too deep, the shadows too long, and Morrell's words kept echoing in my head. If you hear something that doesn't sound like it belongs, one evening, back at the station, I was making dinner in the small kitchen when Ben finally spoke to me, unprompted. He walked in, silent as a shadow, and leaned against the counter, watching me. "Morrell's tell you about the sounds?" he asked, his voice still flat, but with a hint of something else now, curiosity, or maybe warning. I turned, surprised he was talking to me. "Sounds. She just said to listen out for things that don't belong." Ben nodded slowly. "That's her way of putting it. Locals call them the creek whispers." Creek whispers. I frowned, flipping a veggie burger in the pan. "What are those?" He hesitated again, his dark eyes fixed on me. "Some say it's just the wind in the canyons. Others say it's something else, something old. Something that doesn't like people on the trail after dark." A chill prickled my skin, despite the warm stove. "And you? What do you think they are?" Ben just stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned and walked back to his desk by the window, leaving me alone with the sizzling burger and the growing knot of unease in my stomach. Later that night, after Morrell's had gone to bed in her small room at the back of the cabin, I found myself unable to sleep. The wind had picked up, rustling the redwood needles outside, and the cabin creaked and groaned in the gusts. But beneath the natural sounds, I thought I heard something else, faint, indistinct, like whispers on the edge of hearing. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. Was it just the wind playing tricks? Or was it something else? Something Morales and Ben were hinting at. The whispers seemed to grow a little louder, weaving in and out of the wind, just at the edge of perception. They weren't words, not really, more like sighs, or maybe calls. Shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination running wild on my first week in a new, isolated place. But deep down, a cold seed of doubt had been planted. And as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the whispers in the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the silence of Shadow Creek Trail. That something was out there, watching, waiting, and whispering my name on the wind. The next day, the whispers were still on my mind. I tried to brush them off as nerves, rookie jitters, but the feeling lingered. Even the bright California sunshine filtering through the redwoods couldn't quite dispel the chill that had settled in. Morales assigned Ben and me to patrol the Shadow Creek Trail together. I was hoping to get some answers from him about the creek whispers, but Ben was even more withdrawn than usual. He walked in silence, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead, like he was expecting something to jump out from the shadows. The trail was busier than I'd seen it, a Saturday crowd enjoying the redwood giants. Families with kids, serious hikers with backpacks and trekking poles, couples strolling hand in hand, the usual weekend mix. But even with the people around, the forest felt different, quieter, somehow. The birds were silent, the squirrels were hidden, and the usual background hum of the woods was muted, replaced by that heavy, expectant stillness. We hiked for a couple of hours, checking permits, answering questions about trail conditions, the usual ranger routine. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but the silence was getting to me. I felt like we were walking through a soundproof room, cut off from the natural world. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence, even if Ben wasn't exactly chatty. "So, Ben," I started, trying to sound casual. "Those creek whispers, you mentioned you ever actually heard them." Ben stopped walking, turning to face me. His dark eyes were intense, almost unsettlingly so. "You heard them last night, didn't you?" he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, faint, like whispers. But I thought it was just the wind." He shook his head slowly. "It's not the wind, Alex, not always." "Then what is it?" I pressed, finally getting the conversation I'd been hoping for. Ben looked around, like he was checking to make sure no one else was listening, even though we were alone on a quiet stretch of the trail. "This forest, it's old, Alex. Older than you can imagine. Redwoods, they've seen things, heard things." He paused, his gaze drifting up to the towering trees, their tops lost in the mist. "Some places, some trails, they hold on to things. Memories, emotions, things that get left behind." "Left behind by who?" I asked, feeling a prickle of unease. He shrugged, a dismissive gesture that didn't quite hide the seriousness in his eyes. "Hikers. Loggers, people who got lost, people who died out here." My stomach tightened. "You're saying the creek whisperers are ghosts?" I asked, trying to keep a skeptical tone. Ben didn't answer directly. He just looked at me, his gaze intense. "They're the forest remembering, Alex. And sometimes the forest remembers things it shouldn't." Well, he started walking again, leaving me standing there, staring after him, the silence of the woods suddenly feeling a lot more ominous. I hurried to catch up, my mind racing. Ghosts, really. It sounded like something out of a Campfire story. But the way Ben said it, he believed it. And that was more unsettling than any ghost story. We continued the patrol in silence, the rest of the day thankfully uneventful. But the feeling of being watched, of being listened to, intensified. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept glancing into the deeper shadows between the redwoods, half expecting to see what? I didn't even know. Something pale and gaunt, like in a nightmare. That evening, Morales was called out to deal with a minor incident at the park entrance, leaving just Ben and me at the station. The storm clouds that had been threatening all day finally broke, and rain lashed against the cabin windows, driven by a rising wind. The power flickered, then died, plunging the station into darkness except for the fire in the hearth. Ben didn't seem fazed by the power outage. He just sat at his desk by the window, staring out into the storm-swept darkness, the firelight flickering across his face. I lit a couple of oil lamps, the dim yellow light barely pushing back the shadows in the small cabin. "Power goes out a lot here," I said, trying to make conversation to break the heavy silence that had descended again. Ben just grunted in response, still staring out the window. "So," I tried again. "Those creek whispers, have you ever seen anything out there? Besides, the wind." This time he turned, his dark eyes catching the lamplight, making them seem to glow faintly. He looked at me for a long moment, and then, slowly, he nodded. "Once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the fire crackling in the silence. "A long time ago, when I first started here. Night patrol up near the old logging camp." He paused, staring into the fire now, his expression distant. "Heard my name called. Whispering on the wind. Thought it was another ranger playing a joke. Called back. No answer. He shivered even in the warmth of the fire. Kept hearing it, though. Closer, closer, like it was circling me." "What did you do?" I asked, my voice hushed, drawn in by his story. "Ran," he said simply. "Ran like hell. Didn't stop running till I was back at the station. Didn't go back on night patrol for months." He fell silent again, staring into the fire, lost in his memory. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the rain beat against the roof like frantic fingers. The firelight danced, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of the cabin. "Hey, what did you see?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ben shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the flames. "Didn't see anything. Just felt it. Felt something watching. Wait," and he looked up at me then, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "You hear the whispers, Alex. Be careful. This forest, it listens, and sometimes it answers." The wind howled again, louder this time, and I could have sworn, just for a moment, I heard something else in the wind. Faint, indistinct, like whispers on the edge of hearing. Whispers that seemed to be calling my name. A cold dread settled over me, deeper and darker than anything I'd felt before. The fire crackled, the rain lashed, and in the flickering lamplight, Ben's face was pale. his eyes filled with a fear that mirrored my own. We were alone in the dark cabin, surrounded by the ancient, whispering redwoods, and I had the terrifying feeling that something out there was listening to every word, waiting for us to step outside into the deeper shadows of Shadow Creek Trail. Sleep was a lost cause that night. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like footsteps, like whispers drawing closer. I lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, the oil lamp on my bedside table casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock me. Ben stayed up by the window, silent and watchful, a dark figure outlined against the storm-racked trees. He didn't say anything more, but his presence was a kind of grim comfort, a shared vigil against the unseen. The storm raged through the night, and with it, the whispers seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. They weren't just in the wind anymore, they were everywhere inside my head, just at the edge of hearing, a constant, maddening murmur. Sometimes, I thought I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences, my name repeated over and over, in voices that sounded vaguely familiar, yet chillingly wrong. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a dripping, mist-shrouded forest. The power was still out, and the cabin felt cold and damp. Morels returned, looking tired and harassed, but seemingly oblivious to the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the station. "Rough night," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from a thermos. "Anything happen here?" Ben and I exchanged a look. What could we say? Oh, just the ancient forest spirits whispering our names all night. No big deal. "Just the storm?" I said, forcing a casual tone. Ben remained silent, still staring out the window, his coffee untouched. Morels shrugged, accepting my answer without question. She was all business, focused on the day's tasks. She assigned me to solo patrol of the Redwood Creek section of the trail, longer, more isolated loop than Shadow Creek. My stomach clenched. Solo patrol. Deeper into the woods. Exactly what I didn't want. "You sure about that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe today we should stick together." Given the weather last night, I trailed off, knowing it sounded weak, like an excuse. Morels frowned at me, her gaze sharp. "Walker, you're a ranger. Solo patrol is part of the job. Can't hold your hand every step of the way. Get out there, keep your eyes open, and do your job." That was that. No arguing with morals. I nodded, grabbed my gear, and headed out. The weight of her words and the unspoken dread of the forest heavy on my shoulders. Redwood Creek Trail was even more isolated than Shadow Creek. The trees were thicker, the shadows deeper, and the silence it was almost deafening. The mist hung heavy, clinging to the redwood needles, muffling every sound. It felt like walking through a gray, silent world, cut off from everything familiar. As I hiked deeper into the woods, the whispers started again. Faint at first, just at the edge of hearing, like the wind sighing through the trees. But they grew louder, more insistent, weaving in and out of the natural sounds, becoming more distinct, more directed. They were calling my name. "Alex, Alex," whispered on the breeze, murmured from the shadows, echoing in the silence, my name, spoken in voices that were both familiar and alien, laced with a chilling undercurrent of hunger, longing. I couldn't tell. It was just wrong. I tried to ignore them, to focus on my patrol, checking trail markers, scanning for hazards. But the whispers were relentless, a constant, maddening distraction, gnawing at my nerves, fraying my sanity. "Alex, come closer, we're waiting." My pace quickened, my breath catching in my throat. I started to feel like I was being followed, watched from the shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made me spin around, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was never anything there, just the silent trees, the swirling mist, and the whispers on the wind. Then I heard a different sound, faint at first but distinct from the whispers, steps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the fallen redwood needles behind me, sumlowing me. I stopped dead, my hand instinctively reaching for the radio on my belt. Morals, Ben, anyone. I think someone's behind me on Redwood Creek Trail. My voice trembled, betraying my fierce silence. Only static on the radio, dead air, of course. Remote patrol, deep in the woods, radio dead, perfect. The footsteps continued, slow, steady, getting closer. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, I scanned the mist, shrouded trail behind me. Nothing. Just the empty trail, disappearing into the gray silence. But the footsteps, they were still there, just out of sight, just around the bend in the trail. Alex. The whispers were louder now, closer, almost in my ear. Don't be afraid, we just want to talk. With footsteps like that. With whispers that chilled me to the bone. No way. My instinct screamed at me to run. But run where? Deeper into the woods. Back towards whatever was behind me. I stood frozen, caught between fear and indecision, the footsteps drawing closer, the whispers swirling around me, calling my name, promising something. Something I didn't want to know. Then, through the mist, I saw it. A figure. Tall, gaunt, moving slowly, deliberately, emerging from the shadows between the trees. Pale and distinct, shrouded in the mist, but undeniably there. Coming towards me. My breath hitched in mind. It was just a hiker. Maybe. Lust. Injured. But something about the way it moved, the way it seemed to glide through the mist, the sheer wrongness of its presence, it sent a jolt of pure terror through me. Alex. The whispers coalesced into a voice, closer now, clearer, right in front of me, even though the figure was still some distance away. A voice that sounded like mine, but twisted, distorted, hollowed out like an echo from a nightmare. We've been waiting for you. The figure kept coming, slow, steady, relentless. And in that moment, staring into the mist, listening to my own voice, twisted and corrupted, calling me closer, I knew. This wasn't a hiker. This wasn't human. This was the whispers made flesh. The forest answering. And it was coming for me. Terror lent me speed. I turned and ran, not thinking, not looking back, just running, blindly, desperately, back the way I'd come, the whispers echoing behind me, now laced with a chilling, triumphant laughter. The hunt was on, and I was the prey. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. The trail blurred beneath my feet, the trees whipping past in a green and gray rush. Behind me, the whispers turned into a chorus, a cacophony of voices, all calling my name, all laced with that chilling, distorted echo of my own voice. Alex, come back, we're lonely. The footsteps behind me were impossibly fast, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I risked a glance over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of it through the mist. Taller now, more defined, no longer just a vague figure. Pale skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, long, spindly limbs and eyes that burned with a cold blue light. The thing from my nightmares made real. Terror lent me a burst of adrenaline. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs. The stitch in my side, the screams of my protesting muscles. I had to get back to the station. Morales. Ben. Maybe the radio would work closer to the cabin. Maybe there was still a chance. But the whispers were inside my head now, not just around me. They were in my thoughts, twisting my fear, amplifying my panic. Nowhere to run. Alex, nowhere to hide, we're already inside you. I stumbled, nearly fell, catching myself on a redwood trunk, splinters digging into my hand. I kept running. The image of that gaunt figure burned into my mind, those glowing blue eyes, that distorted, mocking voice. Then, ahead on the trail, I saw something that made my heart leap with a desperate kind of hope. Sunlight, breaking through the mist, illuminating a patch of the trail ahead, the edge of the woods. The clearing around the ranger station. Salvation. I pushed myself to a final sprint, bursting out of the trees and into the clearing, stumbling towards the cabin. The whispers still echoing in my ears, but fainter now, receding with the shadows of the deep woods. The station was there, small, solid, a beacon of safety in the swirling mist. Smoke still curled from the chimney, a thin plume of normalcy in the nightmare. I slammed the cabin door shut behind me, fumbling with the latch, bolting it closed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit only by the fire in the hearth. Empty. Morales and Ben were gone. A fresh wave of despair washed over me. Alone. Again. But then I saw a note on the table weighted down by a radio, Morel's handwriting. It's out. Generator shed. Back soon, M. Power. The generator. Radio. Hope flared again. A tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. The generator shed. I remembered seeing it behind the cabin, a small metal outbuilding. If I could get the generator started, get the radio working, maybe I could call for help. Maybe I could get out of this. I grabbed the rifle, checked the magazine, and crept to the back door of the cabin, peering out into the mist. The generator shed was just a few yards away, but the space between felt like a vast, terrifying distance. The whispers were fainter here, but still present, still calling, still watching. Taking a deep breath, I I unbolted the back door and darted out into the mist, sprinting towards the generator shed, my heart pounding, every nerve screaming. I fumbled with the latch on the shed door, my fingers clumsy with fear, finally throwing it open and stumbling inside. The shed was small, cramped, filled with the smell of gasoline and oil. The generator was there, a bulky metal machine, thankfully not too complicated looking. I found the starter cord, pulled at nothing. Again, harder this time. The engine cuffed, sputtered, then roared to life, filling the shed with a vibrating, blessedly loud noise that drowned out the whispers, at least for a moment. Light flooded the cabin as the power flickered back on. I scrambled back inside, grabbing the radio, my hands trembling as I switched it on, frantically dialing for dispatch. Dispatch, this is Ranger Walker, Pine Creek Station, Redwood National Park. Mayday, mayday. Emergency situation, need immediate assistance. Repeat mayday. Silence, my heart sank. Dead air. Still, the generator was running, the lights were on, but the radio was useless. Trapped. Then, a voice, not from the radio, but from the cabin itself. Faint, distorted, chillingly familiar. Alex were disappointed. The whispers were inside the cabin now. The lights flickered again, then dimmed, the warm yellow glow replaced by a cold, sickly blue light that pulsed and throbbed, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the walls. The temperature in the cabin plummeted, the air growing icy, my breath fogging in front of my face. The wooden walls creaked and groaned, like something heavy was pressing against them, trying to get in. You can't escape us, Alex, this forest is ours, and now you are too. The voices were all around me, swirling, echoing, suffocating. I backed away, clutching the rifle, my eyes darting around the cabin, searching for something, anything, a weapon, an escape route, a miracle. My gaze fell on the fireplace, the dying embers glowing faintly in the dim, blue light. Fire, Ben had said something about fire. The Wendigo fears fire. Wendigo. Creek whispers. Whatever it was, maybe fire would work. Maybe it was the only chance I had left. Desperation lent me strength. I grabbed the oil lamp from the table, the flame flickering wildly in the unnatural light, and hurled it into the fireplace. The lamp shattered, oil splashing onto the dying embers, igniting with a sudden, whooshing roar. Flames erupted, licking up the chimney, pushing back the shadows, banishing the cold. Blue light with a warm, flickering orange glow. The whispers recoiled, fading back, retreating from the sudden burst of heat and light. The cabin seemed to breathe again, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly, replaced by the crackling warmth of the fire. I grabbed more wood, throwing it onto the flames, feeding the fire, building it higher, hotter, a roaring barrier against the darkness, against the whispers, against whatever was out there, waiting in the woods. I huddled by the fire, rifle in hand, watching the flames dance, listening to the crackle and roar, the only sound now in the sudden, blessed silence. The whispers were gone. For now. But I knew they were still out there, in the shadows, beyond the firelight, waiting for the flames to die down, waiting for me to step outside, waiting to claim me for the forest. Hours crawled by. The fire burned low, then lower. I fed it more wood, rationing the dwindling supply, knowing I couldn't keep it going forever. The first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, a pale gray glow filtering through the mist, shrouded windows. And then, through the trees, I heard it. A sound that wasn't whispers, wasn't wind, wasn't the crackling fire. A different sound. Faint but unmistakable. Helicopter blades chopping through the air, growing louder, closer. Rescue. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. I stumbled to the door, unbolted it, and threw it open, stepping out into the cold, gray dawn, the firelight spilling out behind me, chasing back the shadows. The helicopter appeared above the trees, rotors churning, descending towards the clearing. I waved frantically, shouting, tears streaming down my face, a broken, sobbing sound of pure, unadulterated relief. They landed, rangers and paramedics rushing out, surrounding me, voices asking questions. Hands checking me for injuries. I could barely speak, just point back at the forest, towards the shadows, towards the whispers that were finally, truly silent. I was airlifted out of Shadow Creek, out of Redwood National Park, back to the world of sunlight and noise and people, back to safety. But safety is relative, isn't it? They say they found the station empty, except for me, huddled by the dying fire. No sign of Morals or Ben, no sign of anything else, just the silent ancient redwoods and the whispering creek flowing on, indifferent to the terror it held within its shadows. I'm in a new park now, far from Redwood, far from Shadow Creek. A busy, well-maintained park full of tourists and noise and life. Safe, they say. But sometimes when the wind blows just right, when the shadows lengthen in the evening, when the silence deepens in the woods, I still hear them. Faint and distinct, just at the edge of hearing, the whispers calling my name, and I know deep down that they're still out there, waiting, remembering, and listening. Because once Shadow Creek whispers your name, it never truly lets you go. My ride was a total clunker, this rusted-out Toyota Corolla. Seriously, everything was falling apart, except somehow the speakers still worked. Go figure. Riley was riding shotgun, feet propped up on the dash, glued to her phone. Every few minutes, bam, she'd smack my arm to show me some meme I couldn't even glance at while driving. Crammed in the back were Mason, Ethan, and Chloe. Mason, classic Mason, had this styrofoam cup, who knows what was in it, and he was leaning way forward between the seats. Guy always looked like he was about to drop some truth bomb you wouldn't want to hear, but then you'd end up laughing anyway. Ethan was the quiet one, big into hiking and all that survival stuff. Ever since Riley decided we needed a nature guy, Ethan was our dude. And Chloe, she was the chill, kept us from totally losing it when Riley and Mazingen got going, which was like always. Honestly, the drive itself wasn't half bad. Weather was killer blue skies, little breeze. And the road, twisty and turny, going through some seriously gorgeous scenery. We passed a few houses here and there, but then it was just miles of thick forest. By the time we hit the gravel road to the camp, it felt like we'd driven right out of real life and into some forgotten, beautiful corner of the world. Then we saw at this faded wooden sign, barely readable, Black Pine Camp. We all cheered like idiots. I pulled the Corolla into the gravel parking lot, killed the engine, and finally stepped out. Man, the air, pine and earth, cool and clean. For a second, everything felt perfect. Car doors slammed shut, one after another, the echoes swallowed up by the trees. Riley stretched like she was auditioning for a drama club, flannel shirt riding up a bit as she groaned, "Woo." Pretty sure my legs forgot how to leg. Mason naturally had to chime in. "Cry me a river," he said, chucking his mystery cup into a nearby trash can. "Try being squished in the middle seat for 3 hours. I'm like 90% elbows right now." Pull over, practical, pulled out a laminated camp map. Okay, map says the main cabin is just up that path. Supply closet's supposed to be there, and hopefully coffee. Ethan, adjusting his backpack straps, just had to ask, "Coffee's priority one, huh?" Chloe shot him a soft smirk. Obviously. You really don't want to deal with uncaffeinated meat. Trust. The Black Pine Camp, it looked like something off a postcard, at least at first glance. Rustic cabins in a semicircle around a gravel clearing, fire pit in the middle. Beyond that, just trees as far as you could see, branches swaying in the breeze. Mason was the first to break the quiet. "Okay, where's the creepy dude with the hook for a hand?" "He running late." "He's late." "Shut up, Mason," Riley said, rolling her eyes. She started walking towards the biggest cabin, the one that looked like it used to be a mess hall or something. Seriously though, this place has major summer camp horror movie vibes. I am so here for it. "Great," I said. "Just what we need." Riley summoning Jason Voorhees on day one. "Just saying," Riley shot back, pushing open the cabin door and peeking inside. "If I hear one creepy noise tonight, I'm leaving you all behind." "Noted," I said, following her in. Inside, it smelled like old wood and dust, sunlight slicing through cracks in the shutters. Rows of long wooden tables, mostly covered in cobwebs. Mason wandered in behind us, kicking at a bench. "I'm digging this." Chloe, bucket and mop in hand, she'd already found the supply shed, stepped into the room. "Less digging, more cleaning, Mason. Sooner we get this place livable, sooner we can chill." So, yeah, that was Black Pine Camp day one. Seemed perfect at first, but something already felt a little off. We spent the next couple of hours splitting up, tackling the camp cleanup. Ethan, being all outdoorsy, cleared out the fire pit. Chloe, bless her, started scrubbing down the mess hall. Riley and Mason, they got stuck with the sleeping cabins, just as dusty as the mess hall, but surprisingly not falling apart. That left me with unloading duty, food, and gear. Dragging a cooler towards the mess hall, I saw Riley standing in a cabin doorway, arms crossed. She called out. Jet over here, check this out. What's up? I asked, setting the cooler down and walking over. She just gestured inside the cabin. Tell me this isn't totally weird. I stepped in, and yeah, okay, weird. Hanging right from the ceiling was this little bundle of sticks and feathers tied together with some old string. Looked handmade for sure. I said, reaching up to touch it. Don't touch it. Riley slapped my hand away quick. Why not? I asked, rubbing my hand. Because it's creepy as hell, and I don't want you to, activate some ancient curse or something while I'm standing here. Relax, I said. It's probably just a decoration. Yeah, sure, she said, narrowing her eyes. When I'm gone, you can deal with it. No way I'm sleeping in here with that thing hanging over my head. Before I could even answer, Mason's head popped in the door. Hey, lovebirds, quit slacking. Ethan says the fire pit's ready. We're not slacking. Riley snapped, shoving past him. I'm not lovebirds, Mason. Mason just grinned. Whatever you say. We all met up by the fire pit just as the sun started going down. Ethan had set up a circle of these old camp chairs, and Chloe, our queen, had somehow found a bag of marshmallows in our gear. See, Mason said, holding up a marshmallow on a stick like it was a trophy. This is the life. No cell service, no responsibilities. Just us and nature. The fire was starting to die down when we heard the first weird noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, low and faint. None of us said anything. Too busy just hanging out. Mason was in the middle of some crazy story about a haunted amusement park, waving his arms around, totally in his element as the enthusiastic camp counselor he was born to play. And then, bam, the clown's head just pops right off. Blood everywhere. He clapped his hands together for effect. Nice, Riley said, totally deadpan, throwing a marshmallow at him. Way to kill the vibe, Mason. Come on, that was gold. Mason replied, catching the marshmallow mid-air. You're just jealous you don't have my storytelling skills. Pretty sure I'm just mad you exist. Riley shot back, laughing. Guys, shot. Chloe interrupted, holding up a hand. Do you hear that? We all froze. For a second, just the crackling fire and crickets. Then I heard it too. Faint, rhythmic mumbling. Sounded like someone talking themselves. Coming from the woods just past the clearing. What is that? Ethan asked, leaning forward. Wind, I said, but even to me, it sounded weak. No way. Riley muttered, standing up. That's a voice, someone's out there. Yeah, like a serial killer or something. Mason joked, but you could hear the nervous laugh underneath. Chloe shook her head. No, seriously, guys, we need to check it out. What if someone needs help? Or, someone who's gonna murder us? Mason added helpfully. Riley rolled her eyes, grabbed a flashlight. Shut up, Mason. We'll never know unless we look. Don't be a baby. Reluctantly, we all grabbed whatever we could use as weapons, firewood, long sticks, and followed Riley towards the sound. It got louder as we got closer to the trees, the mumbling turning into this unsettling rhythm, hypnotic almost. Rising and falling, weird jitters and sing sounds, hard to describe. We swept our flashlights around. The noise felt like it was right in our ears now. And then we saw her. She was crawling through the dirt, hunched over like some wounded animal. Ethan's flashlight beam caught her pale, wrinkled skin. We all just froze. She was completely naked, body thin, frail, shoulder and hip bones sticking out like they were trying to escape her skin. Hair was gray and stringy, hanging in clumps around her face. Jesus Christ, Riley whispered. Okay. Does she look okay? Riley, Mason hissed back. Chloe took a cautious step forward. Mom, are you all right? The woman didn't react, kept crawling, hands digging in the dirt, mumbling to herself. Voice low, guttural. Words slurring together, didn't sound like any language I'd ever heard. Mom. Chloe tried again, louder this time. Do you need help? Still nothing. Ethan swung the flashlight beam right in her face, but she didn't even flinch. Eyes wide glassy, staring blankly ahead, like we weren't even there. Maybe she's deaf, Mason whispered, voice tight. She's naked. Mason, stop, Chloe said sharply. She stepped closer, hands out like she was approaching a scared animal. Hey, it's okay. We're not going to hurt you. Can you tell us what's wrong? The woman suddenly stopped crawling, froze. just for a second. Only sound was the wind in the trees. Then slowly she turned her head towards Chloe. Holio, Riley breathed. The woman's face a pale, sunken, cheekbones sharp under paper-thin skin, mouth hanging open a little. For a horrible second I thought she might smile, but she didn't. Just stared, glassy eyes unfocused, empty. Chloe took a step back. Okay, maybe we showed. Before she could finish, the woman turned away and started crawling again, dragging herself into the trees. Ma, wait, Chloe called after her. But the woman didn't stop. Mumbling started up again, louder now, bony hands clawing at the ground as she disappeared into the dark. What the hell was that? Mason said, voice shaking. I don't know, Ethan said, lowering his flashlight. But I don't think we should follow her. Follow her, Riley snapped. Who said anything about following her? Chloe looked like she wanted to argue, but then glanced back at the woods, seemed to think better of it. We can't just leave her out there. She's gone, I said, trying to sound firm. And whatever's going on with her, it's not something we can deal with. Let's just go back to the cabin, figure this out in the morning. No one argued. We hurried back to the fire pit, leaving the woods behind. But the air felt heavier now, like the trees were closing in. By the time we got back to the cabin, no one was talking. Inside, we locked the door, just sat there in silence for a while, listening for any sign of the woman. But the woods outside were just silent. Morning came way too fast, dragging with it this bone, deep exhaustion that no amount of coffee or sunlight could fix. Breakfast was a silent affair. Nobody said much. The image of that woman, the way she crawled, the way she looked right through us, hung over the table like a bad smell. Mason, being Mason, finally broke the silence, poking at his cold eggs with a plastic fork. So, is no one going to talk about the naked grandma in the woods? Or are we just pretending last night didn't happen? Riley shot him a glare that could kill. I think we all saw it, Mason. You don't have to be an ass about it, Bod. Just saying, he muttered. That wasn't normal. People don't just do that. She could have been sick, Chloe offered, trying to sound reasonable. Maybe she wandered off from somewhere. From where, Chloe? Ethan asked, leaning back in his chair. We're in the middle of nowhere. Closest houses, 20 miles? Guys, can we not? I said, rubbing my temples. Head was already pounding. Let's just get through today, okay? Maybe she was some random drifter, and she's long gone by now. Riley snorted. Yeah, sure, long gone. Totally normal behavior to crawl around naked and mumble in the dirt before just taking off. The rest of the day weird. We split up again to finish cleaning the camp, but the air just felt different, thicker somehow. Wasn't just the woman, it was everything, the woods, the cabins, even the sky. Like some strange sickness had settled in. Mid-morning, I was clearing brush from the trail near the cabins when I found it. Another one. Small bundle of sticks, feathers, and animal bones tied with frayed red string, hanging from a low branch, swaying in the breeze. What the hell is this? I muttered, staring up at it. Found one too. Ethan's voice startled me. I turned, saw him walking up the trail. They're everywhere, he said. I've counted, 5 so far. Riley found one tied to the side of a cabin, and Chloe's freaking out. I reached up to grab the bundle hanging in front of me. Ethan grabbed my wrist quick. Don't, he said, voice low. Just don't touch it. Why not? I asked. Because it's creepy as hell, that's why. You don't mess with stuff like this. Riley appeared behind him, holding up a bundle of her own. So what do? Just leave them here. Hope the arts and crafts witches don't come back for round 2. She held out her arm, looking at the twigs like they were going to bite her. I was on your page before, Ethan, but these things gotta go. We need to tell someone, Chloe said, jogging up the trail to join us. She was pale, arms crossed tight over her chest. These things weren't here yesterday, and I already took down a few with Mason. Someone's been here, yeah, Riley said. Probably the same someone who was crawling around last night. Stop, I said, voice sharper than I meant it to be. We don't know what's going on, but freaking out isn't going to help. Chloe opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, Mason yelled from the direction of the fire pit. Guys, you might want to see this. We followed his voice to the fire pit. He was crouched over something on the ground. As we got closer, I saw it. A weird symbol etched in the dirt. Perfect circle. Jagged lines radiating out from the center like a sunburst. It's fresh, Mason said, tracing the edge of the symbol with his finger. I checked the fire pit last night before bed. This wasn't here. Okay. Great, Riley said, throwing her hands up. So now we've got creepy symbols, freaky art projects, and a naked lady crawling around in the woods. Are we sure this isn't some elaborate prank? Like, are there hidden cameras somewhere? If it's a prank, Ethan muttered, it's a damn good one. But Shiloh shook her head. I don't think this is a joke. I think we're being warned. Warned. Mason asked, standing up. Warned about what? Chloe didn't answer. Just looked back at the woods, face pale and drawn. The rest of the day, in easy silence. None of us wanted to wander too far from the cabins, but staying close felt worse. Every noise, every shadow in the trees, set my teeth on edge. By the time the sun started to dip, we were all jumpy as hell. Strange symbols, bundles, the heavy quiet of the woods, that was all adding up to something bad. I caught Riley glancing over her shoulder as we walked back to the cabin for dinner. You think she's still out there? She asked, voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Dinner. Microwaved instant noodles. Tension in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. Nobody wanted to say they were scared, but the way Riley kept looking at the windows. The way Mason wouldn't put down the fire poker, yeah. We tried a card game to distract ourselves, but it didn't work. Every shuffle of the deck sounded way too loud. 3 of a kind. Riley said, slapping her cards down on the table. Pay up, losers. Mason groaned, flicked a peanut at her. You're cheating. I know it. Don't need to cheat to beat you, Mason, Riley said, smirking, but her eyes darted towards the window again. Chloe stood up abruptly, wringing her hands. I can't do this anymore. Do what? Ethan asked. Pretend everything's fine. It's not fine. Something's wrong here. The symbols, the bundles. The woman, this whole place feels off. Great, Mason said, tossing his cards on the table. Let's all panic. That'll totally fix everything. She's not wrong, though, Riley said, voice softer now. It's not just her. You all feel it, don't you? Nobody answered. But the silence said it all. And then it started. Faint, just like the night before. Low, rhythmic mumbling drifting through the trees. As my stomach twisted, sound got louder, closer. Wasn't the same as last night. Not one voice this time. Many. Tell me that's the wind, said voice trembling. It's not the wind, Ethan muttered, already grabbing the flashlight. We crowded by the window, staring out into the dark. Fire pit barely visible in the moonlight. But beyond it, figures moved. Hard to make out at first. Shadows shifting just outside the clearing. But as the mumbling got louder, the shadows stepped into the open. Old women. At least, they looked like old women. Moving slow, shuffling, heads low, shoulders hunched. Firelight caught their faces wrinkled, pale blank. Like the woman from last night. 4 of them, all muttering under their breath, same weird, guttural language. What the hell? Mason whispered, backing away from the window. Are they? Chloe started, voice breaking. They're old, Riley said, gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. Women didn't seem to notice us. Shuffled around the fire pit, mumbling, rising, and falling like some bizarre chant. One of them stopped, tilted her head back, mouth opening wide, like she was screaming. But no sound. We should go out there, Chloe said suddenly. Are you insane? I snapped. Did you not see what happened last night? We do not go near them. They're just women, Alex, Chloe said, but her voice was shaking. What if they're lost? What if they're not lost? Ethan said firmly. Look at them. Does that look lost to you? We all turned back to the window. Women had started moving again, heading towards the woods. One of them paused at the edge of the trees, turned, stared right at the cabin. I felt my breath catch. Eyes blank, milky, expression slack. But somehow I felt her looking through the cabin, like she could see us. See me? Lose the curtains, I whispered. Riley moved fast, yanking the curtains shut, plunging the cabin into darkness. We all just stood there for a moment, listening to our own breathing. Muffled murmurs of the women outside, felt like forever. Then mumbling started to fade. They're leaving, Ethan said, voice barely audible. Nobody moved. until the forest went silent again. Even then, we stayed huddled together in the center of the room, too scared to even speak. Finally, Mason broke the silence. So we're all just going to pretend that was normal, right? Shut up, Mason, Riley said, but her voice wavered. None of us slept that night. Every creak of the cabin against the wind sounded like footsteps. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to tell myself it was over. But deep down, I knew they'd be back. Next morning, nobody talked much either. Sat around the cabin's tiny dining table, sipping instant coffee, avoiding eye contact. Daylight felt weak, like the sun was struggling to break through some invisible wall. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see one of those women just standing there in the clearing. Chloe finally broke the silence, voice hoarse. "We'll have to leave," she said suddenly. "Today, right now." Riley, barely touching her coffee, just nodded. "Yeah, this place is messed up. I don't care if the camp leader gets mad. We're leaving." "Fine by me," Mason muttered. "Let's pack up. Get the hell out of here." Ethan set his mug down, rubbed his temples. "Okay, but what's the plan? The car can only take so much gear. Do we? We'll figure it out," Claude erupted. "We'll leave the camping supplies, whatever. We just have tow. Si la menge." Loud metallic clang echoed through the cabin, cutting her off mid-sentence. Everyone froze. What the hell was that? Riley whispered. "Sounded like it came from the car," Ethan said, standing up fast. We all grabbed whatever we could, flashlights, a crowbar, a broom, and headed outside. Clearing was empty. But yeah, sound definitely came from the parking area. Then we saw the car, and my stomach just dropped. Both tires on the driver's side, slashed, deflated, crumpled against the gravel. Long, jagged tears in each one, like something sharp and mean had ripped right through them. "Jesus Christ," Riley muttered. "Not just that," Ethan said, crouching near the hood. He pointed to this dark pool spreading under the car. "They cut the fuel line too." Mason kicked at a rock, cursing under his breath. "Are you kidding me? Who the hell does this?" "The women," Chloe said, voice trembling. "Has to be." Riley threw her hands up. "Okay, great. So now we're stranded in the middle of nowhere. What do we do now?" "We wait," Ethan said, voice firm, but maybe a little shaky, standing up. "Camp leader's supposed to show up tomorrow morning, right?" "Yeah." Chloe said, "That's what, 24 hours. We can survive one more night," Ethan said. "One more night. One more night." Chloe's voice cracked. "Did you see what they were doing out there? What if they come back? What if they don't leave this time?" "We don't have a choice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not walking 20 miles through the woods with no cell service. We stay, and we stick together." O'Reilly looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Just folded her arms, stared at the ground. "Fine, but I'm not just standing here like a sitting duck. We're boarding this place up." So that's what we did. Spent the rest of the day trying to stay busy. Ethan and Mason boarded up the windows in the cabins. Riley and I gathered firewood, like that was going to help against that. Chloe sat by the radio, twisting knobs, useless. "We should have left yesterday," she said when I came back inside. I didn't argue. She was right. Afternoon dragged on, Uni's just getting worse. None of us wanted to go far from the cabin, but being inside felt claustrophobic. Woods seemed darker, shadows deeper than they should be. Riley even found another bundle lying near the fire pit. This one bigger than the others, with something that looked like animal fur tied to it. We didn't touch it. By sunset, we were all back in the main cabin, nerves fried, tempers short. "Okay," Ethan said, voice tight. "If they show up again, we stick to the plan together. Stay inside. Don't open the door." "What if they break in?" Mason asked, voice unsteady. "They won't," Ethan said. Didn't sound like he believed it himself. "We'll be fine." "Yeah, right?" Nobody believed that either. Sky outside went black. Could feel it in my bones. Night was coming. Started with the wind. Shutters rattled. Trees outside groaned like they were about to snap. Ethan had locked and barred the doors earlier. We'd shoved the cabin's flimsy tables against them too, for all the good that would do. Chloe was still by the radio, twisting knobs, silent, desperate plea for a signal. Riley was in the corner, kitchen knife gripped tight, lips pressed into this thin, furious line. Mason sat on the floor, fire poker clutched so hard his knuckles were white. "What time is it?" Riley finally asked, breaking the silence. "Late," Ethan said, crouched by the window, watching the clearing through a crack in the boarded shutter. Riley laughed, bitter. "Great, super helpful. Thanks, Ethan." "Cut it out, Riley," I said, trying to sound steady. "We need to stay calm, calm." She snapped. "Did you miss the part where we're trapped in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of psycho witches who slashed our tires and cut our fuel line? You want me to calm down?" Before Riley could say more, Ethan held up a hand. "Quiet." We all froze, every muscle locked up, straining to hear what Ethan heard. At first, nothing but wind and groaning trees. Then I heard it, the sound been dreading it since sunset. The chanting started faint, like last night, but this time wasn't coming from the woods. Closer, much closer. "Jesus Christ," Chloe whispered. "They're here." Ethan's voice flat. "They're here." We crowded at the window, peeking through cracks. Fire pit in the clearing glowed faintly with embers we thought were dead. Figures moved in the shadows around it. Bodies all jerky, like crows on strings. Same women from last night, or whatever was left of them. Skin loose, torn, raw pink flesh underneath glistening in the firelight. Faces pale hollow, eyes milky, empty. But their mouths moved. Synchronized rhythm. Muttering words that weren't words. One of them bent backwards, impossible angle, head lolling unnatural. Voice got louder. Another dragged something heavy behind her burlap sack, worming, bleeding onto the dirt. Are those? Mason started, voice trailing off, face ashen. Women moved with purpose, dragging the sack towards the fire pit. One reached in, pulled out something struggling, writhing. Animal. Rabbit, I think. Woman held it high, mumbling, rising to fever pitch. Then ripped it open, bare hands. Closed out this choked sob. Stumbled back from the window, couldn't look away. Blood poured down the woman's arms, thick dark pooling at her feet. Flung the carcass into the fire. Hissed pop. Sickening stench of burning flesh filled the air. Chanting louder, more aggressive. Other women followed suit, pulling more animals from the sack. Mangled rabbits, squirrel, something I couldn't even ID, spilling blood into the flames. "Alex, stop watching," Riley hissed, grabbing my arm, yanking me back from the window. "We need to do something." "Do what?" "Riley." Mason's voice breaking. "What the hell are we supposed to do against that?" "We can't just sit here," Riley snapped. "They haven't come for us yet," Ethan said quietly, eyes still glued to the window. "We stay inside. We stay quiet. Maybe that all." He trailed off. We all knew how that sentence was supposed to end. Maybe they'll leave. Fire in the clearing roared higher, throwing long, flickering shadows across the trees. One of the women started to scream. Not pain. Triumph, maybe. Voice guttural, inhuman. Rising above the others as she threw her arms wide, tipped her head back to the sky. Others joined in. Bodies contorting in ways shouldn't be possible. Bones cracked. Joints twisted. But they didn't stop moving. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound. But it was inside me, vibrating in my skull chest, marrow of my bones. Then one of them stopped, turned slow, head snapping unnatural to one side, stared right at the cabin. "Do you know we're here?" Chloe whispered, voice trembling. Woman stepped forward, movements jerky, uneven. Another followed, then another, moving towards us. Eyes gleaming white in the firelight, still muttering, mouth still muttering, jet away from the window. Already backing up. Chanting louder, frenzied, deafening. Could feel it in my teeth ribs. Vision blurred. For a second, thought I might pass out. Then, just as sudden as it started, it stopped. Silence worse than the noise. "They're not coming inside," Riley said, voice trembling but defiant. "Teachy." Sharp, heavy thud against the door cut her off. We all froze, staring at the door. Buckled a little under the impact. Another one. Then another, louder, more violent. "They're trying to break in," Chloe whimpered. Ethan grabbed the crowbar, stepped in front of the door. "Stay back," he said, voice hard but shaking. Thudding stopped. Then, from the other side of the door, low, rasping voice. "Let us in." Not a question. Demand. Wanted to scream, run, anything but stand there. Feet rooted to the floor. "Don't move," Ethan whispered. "Don't say anything." Voice again. Louder this time, closer. "Let us in." Firelight outside flickered. Could see their shadows through the cracks in the shutters. Everywhere. Surrounding the cabin. Waiting. Pounding on the door stopped. For a moment, only sound was our shaky breaths, faint crackle of the fire. Heart hammering so hard, thought it might burst. Riley clutching the kitchen knife like it was a lifeline. Mason fire poker, frozen near the window. "They're gone," Chloe whispered. Voice shook with disbelief. "They're gone." Ethan didn't move from the door. "They're not." Like answering him, window behind us shattered. Glass exploded inward. Riley screamed as something long, Claude reached through, swiping at the air. Hand or whatever was pale, thin, skin sagging off the bones like wet paper. "Get back." Ethan yelled, swinging crowbar, slamming it against the frame. Creature retracted its arm with a guttural hiss. "Block it. Block the window," Mason shouted, grabbing a chair, slamming it against the broken pane. Before we could breathe, another window shattered. Then another, deafening. Each break followed by relentless muttering, scratching of those things clawing at the cabin. "They're everywhere," Riley screamed, backing towards the corner. "Basement," Ethan shouted, pointing at the trap door near the kitchen. "Barricade ourselves down there." We scrambled for the trap door. Chloe practically dragging me, legs like lead. Riley already there, yanking it open, shoving others through. She yelled. Mason went next, then Chloe. Ethan shoved me towards the opening. "Go." Climbed down the creaking ladder into damp, dark basement. Air smelled like mildew, old dirt. Chloe fumbled with flashlight, jagged beams of light across low, claustrophobic space. Ethan followed, slamming the trapdoor shut above him. Just as another crash rang out from the cabin. Something heavy landed on the floor above, sharp scrape of claws on wood. Huddled in the corner, backs against cold stone wall. Room deathly silent except our breathing. For a moment, maybe we were safe. Then trap door creaked. "No," Riley whispered, knife grip so tight hand was shaking. "No, no, no." Door groaned. Wood splintering as something heavy pressed against it. Muttering louder now, filling the room dozen bell chimes. Then, trapdoor shattered. First one dropped in the basement with sickening crunch. Legs bent wrong way when she landed. Didn't seem to notice. Skin hung off her frame, wet rotting folds. Milky eyes glowed faint in the dark. Riley lunged forward, slashing with knife. Hag moved unnatural fast, twisting around strike, slamming Riley to the ground. Riley screamed as claws raked across her chest, tearing shirt, skin like paper. "Get off her." Mason roared, charging forward with fire poker. Swung hard, cracking Hag across the face. Barely phased her. Turned on him, jaw and hanging jagged yellow teeth. More of them dropped in the basement. Movements jerky, inhuman, room filled with chaos. Screams, growls, what sound of flesh tearing. "Run," Ethan shouted, grabbing my arm, pulling me towards far corner of basement. Narrow crawl space led into foundations. Stumbled, almost tripped over something soft, warm. Didn't want to look. Eyes betrayed me. Riley lay on floor, blood pooling beneath her. One of the hags dragging her limp body towards trap door. "No," I shouted, reaching for her. Ethan yanked me back. "She's gone, Alex. We have to go." Couldn't process it. Couldn't believe it. Lotus, most assertive of us, gone. Chloe next. Crawling through tight, damp tunnel, she gasped. "No, get off me." Turned. Saw one of the hags clawing at her ankle, dragging her back. Screams cut short. Another hag appeared behind her, grabbing hair, yanking her into darkness. "Chloe." I screamed. Ethan shoved me forward. "Alex." Keep moving. Crawl space opened into wider section of the foundation. Walls damp, crumbling. Mason there, clutching arm hanging wrong. Face pale, eyes wide shock. "They're everywhere," he mumbled. "We can't, there's too many." Ethan crouched beside him, shaking shoulders. "Stay with me, Mason. We're gonna make it?" But before Mason could answer, shrill, unnatural scream echoed from tunnel behind us. Mason went limp. "I'm Mason," Ethan yelled. No response. Check pulse. Face grin. He's gone too. Just Ethan and me now. 2 left, out of 4. Sounds of hags getting closer. Chanting echoing in narrow space. Had to move fast. "This way," Ethan hissed, pointing an even smaller opening in foundation wall. Barely big enough to squeeze through. "Are you serious?" I asked, panic rising. "See another option." Didn't wait for answer. Dropped to hands and knees, crawling into darkness. Hesitated split second. Looked back at tunnel. Rachel and Jess dragged away. Followed Ethan into cramped space. Crawl space tighter than before. Air thick, damp earth smell, something else acrid, full stomach churn. Crawled on bellies, pushing through narrow passage. Chanting of women still ringing in ears, fainter now. Felt like forever. Tunnel opened again. Wider, still underground, pitch black, air cold, heavy. Ethan fumbled flashlight. Beam cut darkness, revealing route filled earth and space. Where are we? I whispered, voice trembling. Deeper under foundation, I think. Ethan replied, low voice. Hopefully they won't follow us this far. Move deeper into underground space. Flashlight beam dancing dirt walls, exposed roots. Chanting still audible, muffled far away. Kept moving, stumbling darkness, desperate distance cabin. Suddenly, Ethan stopped. Flashlight beam fixed something ahead. What is it? I asked, peering Schlight beamer. Flashlight beam. Small, wooden door set earthen wall. Old weathered. Part of foundation. A way out. I breathed. Hope flickering chest. First time hours within cautious, approach door. Hand hovering rusty handle. Could be, he said, voice tight caution. Or something worse. A hesitated moment. Grabbed handle. Pulled door open. Creaked loudly rusty hinges. Sound echoed underground space. Beyond door, darkness. Different darkness. Not heavy. Oppressive black basement. Lighter, more open. Different smell, too. Not damp earth mildew. Fresh pine night air. Ethan stepped doorway. Flashlight beam cutting darkness. Followed close behind. Heart pounding chest. Emerged into night. No longer basement. Outside woods. Not near cabin. Further to forest. Surrounded trees. Cool, crisp skin. Chanting gone. Forest sounds, night crickets, rustle leaves, breeze. Escaped. Fur lingered. Cold, heavy pit stomach. I live. But Riley Mason Clo gone. Still woods. Still black pine camp. No idea what waiting darkness. We need to get out of here, I said, voice hoarse. Need to get out of these woods. Ethan nodded. Grim face. You're right. Let's go. Started walking. Pushing undergrowth. Deeper into forest. Away from cabin. Away from horrors witnessed. Walked silence. Only sound crunch leaves feet, beating hearts. Didn't know where going. What find. But knew how to keep moving. Keep running. Far, far away from Black Pine Camp. Darkness swallowed friends. Night long. Woods silent. But not alone. Presence trees. Watching. Waiting. And knew, chilling certainty, this nightmare far from over. That's what kept the cracks in my mind from spreading wider. The Appalachian Trail was my sanctuary, my silent witness for months now. It was the only thing tethered me to reality, a constant hum of eleveness when everything else felt numb. Out here, the quiet wasn't just empty space, it was a thick blanket muffling the echoes of before. Down by a creek, the water was a brutal shock of cold against my skin, but I welcomed it. It was a ritual, a small grounding my dad taught me years ago, back when these woods were our playground. Feel the land. Ethan. He'd murmur, like sharing some ancient, sacred secret. Dipping my fingers in the icy current, I could almost hear his voice, feel the phantom weight of his hand on my shoulder. Remember those long treks into the shadowy hollows. He showed me how to read the earth, the language of tracks, the whispers of safe plants, the silent warnings of the dangerous ones. Teenage me used to roll my eyes when he wasn't looking, convinced I'd never need that dusty old knowledge. Funny how life throws you back to the things you swore you'd outgrow. Exhaling slowly, I crouched there, the creek gurgling its ageless song. It was a strange twist ending up back here, in the heart of it all, after everything. People, couldn't stand them. Letting anyone close felt like inviting a storm into a fragile shelter. Yet solitude always seemed to have an expiration date for me. It started a few years after Dad died. His old hiking buddies, guys who'd shared countless trails with him, reached out. They wanted lessons. My dad's knowledge passed down. At first, the idea repulsed me. Teaching. To people. I could barely manage a conversation most days. But out here, knowledge wasn't some abstract concept. It was the razor's edge between living and becoming a ghost in the wilderness. I'd seen what happened to those who stumbled blindly. Sometimes a quick death was kinder. But Dad, he would have wanted me to help his friends, the ones he trusted. So I caved, reluctantly, on my terms. Only serious people, vetted by his friends. No tourists, no Instagram influencers, no weekend warriors looking for a selfie backdrop. AVNCT Kai Olai. The pamphlet screamed, physically and mentally prepared. That was the gake. Then, last week the phone rang. Hey, is this Ethan Bellwether? The voice was all forced cheer. Too bright for the quiet I'd built around myself. It's Jake Olson. Logan Lafferty gave me your number. I hadn't planned on talking to anyone that day, or any day really. But something in Jake's voice, a weird mix of pushy and desperate, made me hesitate before hanging up. Listen, Ethan, he barreled on. I know this is last minute. Seriously last minute, and I hate to be that guy, but we heard about your course. Like word of mouth, you're supposed to be amazing. Our last guide bail had got canceled, total disaster. We're three guys good shape, mostly. Liam played football, knows well, knows enthusiastic. We're just really pumped to learn from you. Amateurs. That's the word that slammed into my head, not city slickers exactly, but green. List, I said, voice flat, clipped. Clients go through physical assessments, wilderness prep certs. No disrespect, Ethan, seriously. Jake cut in that nervous laugh again, we will get it. Waivers, forms, whatever. We're serious about the experience. Just a couple of days, that's all. My mouth opened, ready to unleash the absolutely not. But something in his eagerness, that insistent please, grated on me. Self-destructive pride. Just plain exhaustion. Jaw tight, I let him finish the pitch. I'd owe you one big time. Damn it. Last-minute deals, especially with strangers, were a recipe for disaster. But something in his voice, that insistent need, had wormed its way under my skin. Against every instinct screaming at me, I'd said yes. Now I sat in my cabin, staring at the name scrawled on my clipboard, Jake. Enthusiastic, no problem with the last-minute chaos. Lime, hesitant a few questions, but signed the agreement quick enough. No. Silent. Not a single question. The diner door jingled, snapping me back to the present. Coffee and grace hung heavy in the air, a comforting, grizzy blanket over the murmur of conversations and clatter of plates. Roadside classic. Vinyl booths, swivel stools, a menu fossilized in time. Jake spotted me instantly, waving me over to a corner booth, grin splitting his face. Ethan, hey man, glad you could make it. I walked over, slid into the booth opposite him and Liam. Jake's enthusiasm was intense, hoping it wouldn't crack under pressure on the trail. Liam, though. Liam was all swagger, leaning back, arm draped across the booth, napkin tossed onto the table like a mic drop. Hair slicked back. More club ready than trail ready. Took you long enough, he drawled, sarcasm dripping like cheap cologne. Ignoring Liam, I settled in, nodding a curt greeting. Noah was wedged between Liam and the wall, hunched over a menu, studying it like it held the secrets of the universe. Smaller than I pictured, definitely not athletic. Looking. But watchful, maybe. Didn't even glance up when I sat down. Not a great start. Sorry I'm late, I said, cutting off Jake's eager apology before it could even form. Glanced at Liam, then at the map Jake had spread across the table. No time for pleasantries. Let's get down to business. Absolutely. Jake chirped, handing me the floor like it was a golden microphone. Liam leaned back further, eyes glazed over. Noah shifted, a nervous energy radiating off him. Jeer. Jake started. Got it all. Checked your list twice. Fire starters, first aid. The works. Hold up. Liam interrupted, hand raised dramatically. Fire starters. Seriously, we're going to be out there that long. Thought this was a day or two. Not some survivalist fantasy. I stared at him flatly. If survivalist fantasy means not dying if the weather flips or someone twists an ankle, then yeah. Fantasy realized. Liam rolled his eyes. No offense, but let's not pretend this is Everest, okay? Nice hike, little adventure, Jurassic Park, this ain't. No flinched. A barely perceptible movement. Liam, come on, man. Don't know. Don't worry about it, no. I cut in, annoyance simmering. Cold stare locked on Liam, hoping to burn through that smirk. Keep that attitude up. We'll see how far it gets you. Jake chuckled a nervous, brittle sound. Okay, so, food. Packed it tight, smaller bags, weight distribution, all that. No help me even it out, Bob. Liam snorted. Snack time. Got it. Noah's gaze dropped to his lap, shoulders hunching further. I can carry more if needed. He mumbled, barely audible. Don't mind. You'll carry what I tell you to carry. I said, voice sharp, no room for argument. Not about pride, it's about balance. Someone overloads, they drag everyone down. One person slows, we all slow. Noah nodded, a quick, jerky movement. Jake mirrored him, eager to please. Liam just stared, that stupid grin plastered on his face, like he was tuning me out completely. I was about to lay down the law properly, but the diner door swung open again, cutting me off mid-sentence. Didn't even turn, but the air in the diner shifted. Conversations at the counter stuttered, died. Something changed. Anything else we should know? Jake asked, voice strained, trying to bulldoze through the sudden awkwardness. Just do what I say, we'll be fine. Not here to hold hands, give you the tourist brochure. Experience you wanted, experience you'll get. Keeping you alive is my part. Jake nodded, fast and enthusiastic. Liam shrugged, still radiating boredom. Noah just shrank further into the booth. Meet here dawn. Don't be late, and don't forget, some should be left alone. The voice, it sliced through the diner chatter like a rusty blade, rough gravelly like stone grinding on stone. I turned. Man standing at the counter, staring right at me. Face a roadmap of scars, stitched and puckered skin twisting his features. Eyes gray pits, sunken deep. He didn't move, didn't approach. Just stood there, locked on me. What? I asked, voice sharper than intended. The man's gaze didn't waver. The mountains, he rasped. Some of them should be left alone. Some paths never found. Every instinct screamed to dismiss him. Crazy local, too much time in the sun, too much moonshine. But something in that voice, that raw, unsettling knowing, snagged at me. We'll be fine, I said, trying to sound dismissive, brush it off. He didn't even blink. Just a slow, chilling smile stretched across that scared face. That's what everyone says. Turned, walked out. Door swung shut behind him, and the diner felt colder. What the hell was that? Liam's nervous laugh cracked the silence. Creepy dude. I didn't answer. Ignored warnings before, plenty of times. But this the way he looked, those scars shook my head, trying to dislodge the niece. Dawn, I repeated, voice firmer this time. Be here, don't be late. Outside, the night air hit like a slap of cold water. Deep breath. Found myself glancing towards the dark bulk of the mountains. Then stopped myself. Just a man, weird, crazy man. Mountains didn't care. Next morning we started. Deep woods swallowed us whole. Sharp pine scent, crisp air, felt good in my lungs, a momentary flicker of peace. Tried to hold on to it, despite the knot of unease tightening in my gut. Was so uptight, man? It's just a walk in the woods, Ethan. Liam's voice, grating already. Didn't answer. Just kept my eyes locked on the barely there trail, scanning for signs, for anything out of place. Jake was beside me, puffing slightly, trying to match my pace. Glanced back at Liam. Again, like he'd been doing every few minutes since we started. And no, trailing behind Liam, always behind. Liam, Jake said, voice strained, cautious edge creeping in. It's not just a hike. Weather can change. Miles from anywhere, serious stuff. Maybe just. Lilac snark hardered. What bear gonna jump out, eat us? Or is that why we got Ethan here, wilderness Rambo, protection from the big bad woods? Stopped dead. Turned around, slow burn of anger rising. Look, Liam. Voice low, dangerous. Be as much of an idiot as you want. Out here with me. Listen, got it. Yes, sir. Mocking salute. Shook my head, turned back. Sorry about him, Jake mumbled, voice low. Nodded, didn't reply. My pack felt heavier than it should. Silence settled again, thick and uneasy, as we pushed deeper into the green. The first night bled into the second without incident, technically, though incident-free. Felt like a stretch when you factored in Liam. He'd spent the entire evening holding court, regaling us with tales of his supposed wilderness prowess, each story more outlandish than the last. Jake, bless his peacemaking heart, kept the campfire chatter going, while Noah just watched the flames dance, a silent, flickering shadow at the edge of the light. I mostly stayed quiet, perched on the edge of the firelight, back to the trees, eyes scanning the tree lean. Felt them on me, even then. Something out there, just beyond the ring of fire. By day 2, Liam's need to puff out his chest was wearing thin. It wasn't just the constant jabs, the dismissive smirks, the way he treated every instruction like a personal insult. It was Noah, the way Noah just absorbed it. Shrinking smaller with every barb, eyes darting away whenever I looked at him, shame radiating off him in waves. Jake tried, you could see it, deflecting Liam's worst barbs, trying to keep the peace, but Noah just wouldn't meet his eyes either. At least Jake was trying. That counted for something, I guess. Had to work with what I had. Ridge up ahead. I said, voice clipped, breaking the strained silence that had settled over us. Sun was starting to dip. Long shadows stretching across the trail. Water source there. Fill up, then push another couple miles, find a decent campsite before dark. Another 2 miles. Lime groaned, dramatic as ever. Dude, land speed record seriously. Thought this was supposed to be, like, fun, not some Ethan Bellwether death march. Jake jumped in, bless him. 2 miles isn't that bad, Liam. We're making good time. Good time for what? Liam scoffed, racing squirrels. Thought we were experiencing nature, not speed hiking ourselves into an early grave. Liam, I snapped, patience fraying at the edges. Feel free to take a nap right here. Roll downhill, whatever your speed is. Otherwise, shut it and move. A silence descended again, thicker this time, laced with Liam's simmering resentment. We made the ridge without further commentary, thankfully. Trail opened up onto a narrow spine of rock, sheer drops on either side, wind whipping at us, colder up here. Stopped to let them catch their breath. Knew these ridges like the back of my hand. Rained them, fogged them, even pushed through sleet across them once. But something felt off, different. Couldn't place it. Just a prickling unease under my skin. Started down the other side, towards the planned campsite for night 2. Jake predictably jumped right into camp chores, gathering kindling, sorting gear, peppering me with questions about tent setup, fire building, wilderness first aid. Eager to learn that one, kept an eye on Liam. He'd wandered off again, kicking at loose rocks and dirt near the edge of the clearing, restless energy buzzing off him. Noah hovered in the middle, a ghost in our little camp, watching everyone, unsure where he fit. Liam, don't wander too far. I barked, grabbing an armful of firewood, heading towards the fire pit. Yeah, right here, wilderness daddy. He tossed back dismissive, just out of sight. Didn't like it. Ton the way he kept pushing boundaries, testing limits. But Jake was asking about tent stakes, proper anchoring in rocky soil needed my attention. Turned away, focused on the task, pushing Liam to the back of my mind. Darkness fell fast. Campfire crackled, spitting sparks into the night. Then Liam reappeared, grinning, something clutched in his hand. Check this out, he announced, mischievous glint in his eyes. What's that? Jake asked, leaning forward, intrigued. Liam held it up, flat black stone. Carvings etched into the surface. Looked like an eye, maybe. Found it over there, Liam said, pointing vaguely back into the trees. Souvenir. Put it back, I said, instantly, voice hard. Chill, dude, it's just a rock. Liam scoffed, turning the stone over in his fingers. Jake shifted uneasy. Yeah, Liam, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't have taken it. What if it's, important? Liam laughed loud and dismissive. The ancient curse, you think. Seriously. It's a rock. Jake, get over it. Didn't argue. Didn't like it. Something about that stone-heavy feeling settled in my gut. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Lay in my bag, listening to the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the endless whispers of the forest. Then it hit me, a presence. Opened my eyes, stared up at the star-dusted sky. Nothing. Looked around at the dark shapes of the trees. Nothing visible. But I felt it. Something watching. Not the forest, not the wind. Something else. The wind howled through the pass. A banshee wail that swallowed every other sound. Snow hammered down, a white curtain blurring the world into nothingness. Squinted, uselessly, at the GPS, blank. Ever since the blizzard hit, it was just a dead screen, a useless rectangle of plastic and glass. Map of the area, frozen mid-refresh, forever searching for a signal that wasn't there. Ethan. Jake's voice, tight with panic, barely cut through the wind. He was right behind me, close enough to touch, but in this whiteout, he was just a shifting shape in the swirling snow. What do we do? Stop. Keep moving. Didn't answer right away. Stared into the white abyss, trying to find something, anything familiar. Trail. Gun. Wiped clean. Landscape itself was dissolving, contours blurring. Landmarks vanishing under the relentless snow. Impossible to see, impossible to know where we were. Even if the trail was visible, this storm had already written the terrain, made it alien. Keep moving, I said, finally, voice hoarse against the wind. Started walking again, pushing forward blind. Can't stop. Stop, we freeze. Motioned them forward, a jerky wave of my hand. More felt than seen. Stay close. Jake stayed glued to my heels. Could feel his fear radiating off him, a cold sweat in the freezing air. He kept glancing back over his shoulder towards Liam, who was lagging, a shadowy figure swallowed by the storm. You can't be serious. Liam's shout, surprisingly clear, ripped through the wind's roar. Struggling to catch up. Voice edged with hysteria. This is insane. We're going the wrong way, Ethan. Clearly the wrong way. Stopped. turned slowly into the teeth of the blizzard. Jake stumbled to a halt beside me. Then Noah finally catching up, face pale and pinched. Liam was last, looming out of the white swirl, smugness clinging to him even in the face of a full-blown blizzard. Wrong way, I said, voice dangerously calm, fighting to keep the rising tide of frustration from flooding over. How can you tell, Liam? We're in the middle of a goddamn whiteout. He smirked, eyes glinting, arrogance burning bright even in this storm. Because, genius, he drawled, we're walking in circles. Past that same rock formation back there 10 minutes ago. You're leading us straight into a dead end. Jake tried immediate, voice trembling. Liam, come on, man-to-be. Jake, Liam snapped, cutting him off. You listen for once. This guy's supposed to be some wilderness guru, right? But he's leading us further and further off track with his stubbornness. Took a step towards Liam. Wind clotted my face, icy needles, but the anger inside was a furnace. You think you know better, Liam? I asked, voice low, dangerous. Then tell me, where's the trail? Nearest campsite. How far to civilization? Tell me where to go, since you're suddenly such a goddamn expert. He glared, bravado flickering, but could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the dawning realization he was bluffing. Don't need to know coordinates to see we're heading the wrong way. He spat, recovering fast. Signs, Ethan. There were signs. Back near that ridge. Fork in the path. Obvious we should have gone the other way. Other way. Laughed, a harsh, humorless sound swallowed by the wind. You mean the path that dead ended at a cliff? You think you'd have found a better way by walking off a goddamn ledge? You'd have killed us all. He stepped closer, voice rising to match the wind's fury. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not special just because you teach weekend warriors how to tie knots, Ethan. You're leading us to our doom. Guys, stop. Jake pleaded, voice cracking. It's freezing, this isn't helping. Helping more than following him. Liam snarled, turning to Jake, then no. Saw a better trail miles back, taking it. Smart ones you'll follow. Liam, please. Jake's voice broke. Don't even know where that goes. We'll get even more lost. For Christ's sake. Lost is where we're headed with him. Liam yelled back, gesturing dismissively at me. Not staying here to freeze to death playing follow, the leader with Captain Clueless. He turned abruptly and plunged straight into the storm, heading somewhere. Anywhere but here. No hesitated, caught between us. Then, with a look of utter resignation, he scrambled after Liam. Liam, wait up. He cried, voice thin and swallowed by the wind, trying to keep pace with Liam's long, reckless strides. He glanced back at Jake, then at me, a flicker of apology in his eyes, before vanishing into the swirling white. Instinct screamed to grab him, drag him back, yell at him for being a goddamn fool. But no point. People who couldn't see their own limits, they learned the hard way, or they didn't learn at all. Just disappeared. Jake stared after them, face stricken, turned back to me, eyes wide, terrified. What do we do, Ethan? Wind howled, snow stinging my face. Could barely see Liam and Noah anymore, just fading shapes swallowed by the white. Wanted to scream, rage at Liam's stupidity, at Noah's spinelessness, at the whole goddamn mess. But no time. Ethan. Jake's voice, barely a whisper now. Stick with me. I said, voice rough, forcing calm I didn't feel. We catch up to Noah, pull them both back. Gotta stick together. You think he'll stop? Jake's voice was laced with doubt, fear. Doesn't matter what he does. I snapped, sharper than I meant to. You stick with me. He nodded quick, jerky, and huddled closer. We started moving again, pushing through the deepening snow. Faster now, urgency clawing at me. Snow underfoot felt different. Subtle shift, something off. Couldn't place it at first. Then it hit me. Echo, slight unnatural echo to my footsteps. Ground felt too smooth, too even. Kept walking faster, the feeling growing stronger, prickling unease morphing into a cold dread. The ground underfoot, it wasn't right. Grooved deep into head, a strange trench, like line cutting through the snow, snaking through the trees at an unnatural angle. Not a trail. Not a natural one anyway. Something else. Something wrong. Liam. I yelled again, urgency cracking my voice. Instinct screaming, redlining. Stop. Turn back. Now, this isn't a trail. We need to turn back. He slowed just enough to glance back, smug grin plastered on his face, even through the swirling snow. Arrogance burned in his eyes, even from this distance. "Don't know what you're talking about?" he shouted back, voice distorted by the wind. "Said we'd know a trail when we saw one. This is it. Quit your whining. Keep up." "Not a trail, Liam," I roared, fists clenching, frustration boiling over, fighting to be heard over the wind's shriek. The snow's relentless roar. "Wrong. Ground's all wrong, Liam. Look at the ground." But he wasn't listening. Noah, a lost shadow, trailed blindly after him. The groove widened, opened out, and then we saw it, looming out of the blizzard, something massive rising from the snow-draped ground. Stone. Giant, black, impossibly smooth. No snow clinging to it, no ice. Wind seemed to shy away from it, leaving a pocket of a natural stillness around its base. Covered in carvings, those same unsettling symbols as the stone Liam had pocketed. And at the base, etched deep into the black rock, that triangular symbol, camera lens. Froze. Air punched from my lungs. Heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, suffocating silence around the stone. Mouth opened. Uselessly. Words jammed in my throat, choked by a terror I couldn't name. Never seen anything like it. Felt wrong. Out of place. Alien. Air itself seemed to vibrate, a low, sickening hum that made my stomach churn. Jake grabbed my arm, fingers digging in, voice a strangled rasp of fear. "What the hell is that?" "Ethan." "I don't know," I stammered. Voice a broken whisper. Liam, oblivious, or maybe just willfully ignorant, just walked right up to it, grinning like he'd stumbled on buried treasure. "Holy shit." He breathed, laughing, pointing at the monolith like it was some prize he'd won. "You guys see this? This thing's huge, worth a fortune if we can't. Don't touch it." I roared, voice ripping through the unnatural quiet. First time I'd raised my voice, truly yelled. Startled him, saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes just for a heartbeat. Then the ground shifted. Low rumble deep in the earth's bones. Started as a tremor, a shiver, then built, fast, violent. Tremor became a full-blown earthquake. Struggled to stay upright as the earth bucked and heaved beneath us, groaning, shifting like something vast and monstrous was waking below. Noah went down, knees buckling, face contorted in terror. Jake grabbed onto me, hands like claws, white-knuckled grip. "What the hell is happening?" he screamed, voice lost in the earth's roar. "Don't know," I yelled back, uselessly. "Stay close." Don't the ground cracked, right next to Jake. Didn't see it coming. 1 second he was there, hand clamped tight on my arm, the next gone. Sudden, deafening rip as the earth split open, a jagged black chasm swallowing him whole in the blink of an eye. "Jake." I screamed, reaching, grabbing for empty air. He was gone. No time to react, no time to grab him. Last thing I saw, his eyes wide, locked on mine, pure, unadulterated terror, then blackness. Swallowed by the earth, too shocked to even scream. Silence. Not from the storm. Storm raged on, louder than ever. Silence in me. Breath locked in my lungs, voice frozen solid. Just stared into the gaping chasm, raw black wound in the snow, like I expected Jake to just climb back out. Ground under Liam and Noah shifted again. Further ahead, vibrations even stronger there. Groove widened monstrously. Surface under Liam's feet just dissolved, crumbled away as he turned, finally, to look back at me. "Ethan," he yelled, voice cracking, finally, panic breaking through the bravado. Ran, didn't think, just moved. Threw myself forward through the blinding snow, ground cracking, heaving all around me. Noah was right on the edge, legs scrabbling for purchase, feet sliding on loose snow, lost footing. "No!" I screamed uselessly. Too late. Ground gave way a sickening crunch, and they were gone too. Both of them. Vanished. Swallowed whole. "Liam! No!" Raced to the edge, desperate, reaching, grabbing for anything, anyone, nothing. Just emptiness. The rumbling intensified, deafening now, earth tearing itself apart. Giant stone above, that black monolith with its carvings, the triangle eye vibrating. Humming. Low, menacing, alive. Barely registered what was happening before the ground under me gave way too. Void opened up. Falling. Last thing I saw, that black stone, sliding to place above, sealing the darkness shut. Woke up in black. Total, absolute black. Head throbbed a dull, insistent hammer against my skull. Mouth tasted like copper, thick with blood. Bone deep cold seeped into me. A cold wasn't just air temperature, but something colder. Stiff. Sore. Every muscle screamed in protest. For a heartbeat, thought I was still dreaming. Or maybe dead. Couldn't see. Anything. No up, no down, no left, no right. Just nothing. Then, fragments of memory clawed their way back. Blizzard, stone, Jake falling, nose sliding. Liam's terrified face, ground ripping open. Falling, endless fall. Shaky breath hitched in my chest. Assessed myself piece by piece. Fingers numb but moving, legs aching heavy, but they worked. Tried to sit up. Head slammed into something solid low above me. Felt around me, hands brushing against damp earth, cold stone. Ground beneath me, wet. Fingers came away slick dark. Blood. Pit opened in my stomach, cold and deep as the darkness around me. Had to calm down. Had to think. Jake. Voice cracked, a pathetic croak in the suffocating silence. Liam. No. Silence answered. Staggered to my feet, dizziness washing over me, nausea churning. Air thick, heavy damp. Cold stone, slick mud under my bare feet. Crawled blindly, hands outstretched, trying to get my bearings. Desperate scramble in the dark. Then, fingers brushed against something familiar. Backpack. Fumbled for the straps, ripped it open, praying nothing had spilled out. Dug blindly, frantic fingers searching until matches. One box left. Just one. Heart leaped with a desperate, fragile hope. Took it down trembling. One match left. One. Held it tight, a tiny promise of light in the crushing dark. Struck it against the box. And then again, nothing. Third try. Still nothing. Fourth strike. Death break. Excrantics against the rough cardboard flare. Tinny flame bloomed, fragile, precious. Held it up, shielding it with my hand. Desperate for a glimpse of anything. Flickering light dance across rough-hewn walls. Tunnel. Narrow, claustrophobic. Smaller than any of the mine shafts we'd passed on the trail. Different. Wrong. Trails of something dark stained the walls, snaking down to the muddy floor. Blood. Floor wasn't stone, just mud. Pools of dark liquid shimmered in the matchlight. Blood. Jake, Liam. No, not here. Gun. Or this was what was left. Match sputtered, died, plunging me back into black. Sat there in the sudden, absolute darkness for a long moment. Couldn't just sit. Had to move. Had to keep moving. Crawled forward, deeper into the tunnel, downwards. Dangerous. One wrong step, a fall in this darkness, death down here wouldn't be quick. Boots were useless, slipping on the mud. Took them off, hung them around my neck by the laces. The leather cold against my skin. Tunnel sloped sharply downwards. Had to lie flat, stomach to the mud, inching forward, sliding always downwards. Cold mud soaked through my clothes, chilling me to the bone. Ignored it. Focused on the next inch, the next handhold, always feeling ahead, testing for sudden drops. Another match. Flickered to life, pushing back the darkness for a precious few seconds. And there, ahead, circle of sticks planted in the mud. Crude, almost childish. And in the center double cross, 2 sticks lashed together. Familiar. Unsettlingly familiar. Couldn't place it. Where had I seen that symbol before? Didn't belong here. Not in this place. Had they made it? Jake, Liam, no! Or something else. Something that had lured us down here, driven us into this darkness. Signpost warning. Pushed the questions away. No answers here. If the others were alive ahead, had to catch up. Tunnel steepened again, losing traction now, sliding, scrabbling for air heavier, purrs. Colder. Only sound, my own rag breathing. The squelch of mud, the occasional drip of water echoing from somewhere deep within the earth. Then saw it. Rope. Hanging from the tunnel ceiling, just a few meters ahead. Heart hammered. Way out. Or trap sign. Someone had put it there. No time to think. Dirt under me shifted, crumbling away. One more slide, one wrong move, void yawned below. Reached for the rope, desperate grab, fingers closing around rough fibers just in time. Holding on, dangling, heart hammering against my ribs. Breath caught in my throat. Real, solid rope. Way out. Had to climb. Purpose, raw and desperate, surged through me. Started pulling myself up, hand over hand, muscles screaming, arms burning, thighs etching. Up. Inch by agonizing inch. A few feet off the ground. Sound from below. Faint at first, then louder. Whistle. High-pitched, piercing, growing louder, faster. Shriek, not a whistle. Shriek, and another joined it. Then another. Wails and cries, echoing up the tunnel, piercing the silence, signaling hunting. Closing in. Coming for me fast. Urgency, raw and primal, flooded my veins, adrenaline spiking, muscles screaming, pushing me upwards. Faster, faster. Rope burned against my palms, raw friction ignore. Hauled myself up, desperate, frantic. Cries louder, closer, frantic now inches behind me. Thuds. Series of heavy thuds, echoing up the tunnel walls. Climbing, gaining. Terrifying speed. Didn't dare look down, clemmed, both hands pulling, digging bare feet into the slick tunnel walls, scrabbling for purchase. Slow, too slow, breathing ragged, lungs burning, hands raw, bleeding. Didn't stop, couldn't stop. Sounds below, reverberating up, closer, louder, louder. Claws on rock. Shrieking cries echoing, deafening, where they were terrifying. Didn't look back. Climbed faster. No use. Moving as fast as I could, not enough. Almost on me. Felt a sharp sting, back of my leg, claw raking flesh. Cry ripped from my throat, scrambling upwards, desperate, frantic. Reach for the next length of rope, eyes blurring with tears, arms trembling, exhaustion, terror. Certain it was right there behind me, about to grab me, drag me down, then gunfire. Deafening. Explosion of sound in the narrow tunnel, so loud, so unexpected, almost lost my grip on the rope. Shock jolting through me. Reverberated, deafening, echoing off the stone walls. For a heartbeat, thought I'd imagined it. Then again, and again, gunfire, someone shooting. Down into the tunnel, hitting them, creatures below. Heard their screams change, pain and rage and confusion. Fear, gunfire kept hammering down, driving them back, giving me a chance. Hurry, voice from above, shouting. Hurry, no time to hesitate, climbed. Everything left, ignored fear, ignored pain, focused on the surface above, that tiny square of light, impossibly far away. Gunshots still echoing, deafening, relentless. Couldn't hear anything else. That was all I could hear. Deafening, echoing a brutal, rhythmic boom that vibrated through the rock, through my bones. Didn't know who was shooting, didn't care. Just up. Had to get up. Adrenaline surged, a desperate, final burst of energy. Clem like a man possessed, ignoring the screaming in my muscles, the raw agony in my hands. Rope blurred past, hand over hand, feet scrabbling, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the gunfire's relentless beat. Then, light, faint, pale, but light. Square of it above, growing larger with every desperate pull. Air changed to thinner, colder, but cleaner, less heavy. Hope flared, fragile, dangerous, but it was there. Almost there. Just a little further, reached the top. Hands ripped, raw bleeding. But I hauled myself over the edge, collapsing on the solid ground, gasping, lungs burning, vision swimming. Snow. Still falling, but lighter now, swirling flakes against a bruised, pre-dawn sky. Wind still howled, but it sounded distant somehow, muffled, like I climbed out of the earth's throat and into the open air. Blinked, vision clearing slowly, men standing over me. Silhouette against the gray sky, rifle still smoking in his hands. Tall, bulky figure, wrapped in furs, face hidden in shadow beneath a heavy hood. Couldn't see his features, just the rifle, and the cold, watchful stillness of him. You made it, voice rough, gravelly, familiar, the man from the diner. Scars twisted his voice just like his face. Barely. Stared up at him, speechless, breath ragged. You shot them. Stupid question, but all I could manage. He nodded, curt, efficient. Had to. They get a taste of blood, they don't stop. Gestured down, towards the black pit at my feet. Lucky you grabbed the rope. Looked back at the chasm. Jagged tear in the earth, black mouth leading down into nothingness. Were Jake, Liam? No, disappeared. Shuddered. Cold deeper than the snow seeped into me. What were they? I was hoarse, fear still clinging to me, a cold, clammy shrug. He shrugged, a slow, unsettling movement. Names don't matter. Hungry, always hung there where the paths shouldn't be found. Those gray, sunken pits, fixed on me unblinking. Mountains have teeth, boy. Some places they bite back. Recognition flickered, cold and sharp. That symbol, double cross in a circle of sticks, camera lens. You left that sign, voice barely a whisper. He nodded again. Warning. For anyone foolish enough to stray. Looked at me, a long, silent stare. You didn't listen. Didn't understand, I choked out. Thought kids maybe. Some kind of prank. He snorted humorless sound. Kids don't leave blood trails like that. Gestured around at the snow-covered clearing, the dark woods pressing in around us. This place, it's old. Older than the mountains. Paths shift. Ground it forgets. Swallows things whole. Silence fell again, heavy, broken only by the wind's mournful cry. Stared at the chasm, at the snow swirling around its black edges. Jake. Liam. No. Gone. Because of Liam's arrogance, knows weakness in my own damn what? Pride. Stupidity, ignoring the warning. Why did you help me? Asked it almost against my will. Didn't expect him to answer. He shifted, bulky figure moving like a shadow. Heard the gunfire. Knew someone was down there. Didn't expect anyone to be alive. Another long, unsettling stare. Mountains take what they want. Don't usually give it back. Didn't say anything. Couldn't. Just sat there shivering numb, staring at the black hole in the earth that had swallowed my clients, my responsibility, my everything. He moved then. Finally, holstered the rifle, reached down hand thick, scarred, reaching for me. Come on, he said, voice rough but not unkind. Jet you back to the trail, if there's anything left of it. I took his hand. Grip surprisingly strong, hauled me to my feet, legs shaky weak, but they held, stood there, swaying, looking back at the abyss, at the silent, snow-covered woods, at the man who'd pulled me back from the edge off whatever that darkness was. Trail, I croaked, voice still raw. Which way? He pointed not towards the path we'd been on, the path that had vanished, but in the opposite direction, towards the deeper woods. Some paths, he said, voice low, almost a whisper, or better left lost. And then he turned and started walking, and I, for reasons I couldn't explain, reasons that chilled me to the bone, followed. Into the silence, into the trees, leaving the open wound in the earth behind, swallowing its secrets, its hunger, its dead, leaving them behind, and walking away, a live, but changed, something broken, something missing, lost somewhere in the black depths below, and something else is something colder, something darker, now walking with me out of the mountains and into whatever waited beyond. My name is Jake, and my buddy Chris, well, he's always been the kind of guy who thinks a weekend in the wilderness is the perfect vacation. Me? I prefer my vacations with room service and a decent Wi-Fi signal. But Chris, he's got this whole commune with nature thing going on, and somehow I always end up getting dragged along. This time, it was Redwood National Park. Majestic trees, he said. Serene trails, he promised. What he conveniently forgot to mention was the part where we'd be miles from civilization with nothing but beers, bugs, and, well, I didn't know what else, lurking in the shadows. Dude, breathe it in, Chris exclaimed, practically inhaling half the forest as we stepped out of my Jeep. He was already decked out in full hiking gear, looking like he'd just walked out of a catalog. I, on the other hand, was still adjusting to the lack of city noise and the overwhelming smell of pine. Yeah, real fresh, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. The air was crisp, I'll give him that. And the redwoods, they were undeniably impressive. Towering giants that seemed to touch the sky. But impressive doesn't always equal enjoyable, especially when you're picturing something with too many teeth and not enough manners popping out from behind one of those giants. See, told ya. Chris grinned, slinging his ridiculously oversized backpack over his shoulders. This is gonna be epic, Jake. We're talking real wilderness, man. No phone service, no crowds, just us in nature. Right, I mumbled, grabbing my own, slightly less ridiculous pack from the back. Just us in nature. Sounds cozy. I didn't add the and potentially terrifying part, but I figured it was implied. We started down the trail, sunlight dappling through the dense canopy overhead. The path was quiet, almost eerily so. Usually, even in a national park, you'd hear other hikers, maybe some kids laughing, or the distant murmur of conversation. But here, just the crunch of our boots on the dirt path and the rustle of leaves in the wind. After about an hour of hiking, the serene trails Chris had promised started to feel less serene and more isolating. The trees grew taller, the shadows deeper, and the silence, if possible, became even heavier. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting a bear to lumber out of the undergrowth, or maybe a mountain lion to come slinking down from a branch. "You okay, man?" Chris asked, noticing my constant fidgeting. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just enjoying the nature," I said quickly, trying to sound casual. "You know, really soaking it all in." He chuckled. "Relax, Jake, it's beautiful out here. Nothing to be scared of." Famous last words, I thought grimly, but I just forced a smile and kept walking, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck that told me we weren't as alone as Chris seemed to think. We hiked for a few more hours, deeper and deeper into the woods. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and swayed around us. The air grew colder, and a dampness settled in, clinging to my clothes and skin. Maybe we should start looking for a place to set up camp, I suggested, my voice sounding a little too eager, even to my own ears. Chris checked his watch. Yeah, good call. Sun's going down. Let's find a decent spot before it gets too dark. We veered off the main trail, searching for a clearing. After another 20 minutes, we stumbled upon a small, relatively flat area near a creek. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. This is it, Chris declared, dropping his pack with a thud. Home sweet wilderness. I just nodded, already feeling the unease settling deeper in my gut. As Chris started unpacking the tent, I wandered to the edge of the clearing, peering into the deepening shadows of the forest. The trees seemed to watch me, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. The silence was no longer peaceful, it felt expectant. A twig snapped behind me and I jumped, spinning around. It was just Chris, holding out a tent pole. Easy there, Jumpy, he said, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Didn't mean to scare you. Yeah, hilarious, taking the pole. But inside, I wasn't laughing. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. And as the last rays of sunlight faded below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple, I had a feeling this epic weekend in the wilderness was about to become something else entirely, something far from serene, something hunted. Setting up the tent was a race against the dying light. Chris, ever the outdoorsman, was a pro, while I mostly just held things and tried not to get in his way. As the last sliver of sun vanished, plunging us into near total darkness, we finally had a flimsy nylon barrier between us and whatever was lurking in the woods. Home sweet home, Chris said, zipping the tent flap closed with a flourish. He sounded annoyingly cheerful, considering the oppressive atmosphere that had descended with the night. Inside the tent, it was cramped but marginally less creepy than outside. We fumbled with our headlamps, casting jittery beams of light around the small space. The forest sounds, which had been a low hum during the day, now seemed amplified, each rustle and snap echoing unnervingly in the darkness. Food, Chris asked, rummaging in his pack. I've got dehydrated chili, gourmet wilderness dining at its finest. Sounds great, I said, though my stomach was twisting itself into knots. Eating was the last thing on my mind. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, listening, waiting. We ate in silence, the only sounds the slurping of chili and the incessant noises of the forest pressing in around us. The wind picked up, sighing through the redwoods, their massive forms now just looming shadows against the inky sky. Every creak of a branch sounded like footsteps, every rustle in the undergrowth like something breathing just outside the tent. Hear that? My voice tight. Chris paused mid-slurp, head cocked. Hear what? Just the wind? Manned. No, listen. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound. There was a subtle scratching, a rhythmic scraping noise, coming from somewhere just beyond the tent wall. Chris listened for a moment longer. Probably just a squirrel or something, he said dismissively and went back to his chili. Squirrels don't scratch like that, I argued, my heart starting to pound. That sounds bigger, he sighed, putting down his spoon. Okay, Mr. Wilderness Expert, what do you think it is then? A Bigfoot with an itch. He chuckled, but it sounded forced. I don't know, I admitted, but it doesn't sound good. The scratching continued, closer now, circling the tent. It was definitely bigger than a squirrel, much bigger. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was even more unsettling. It felt like something was holding its breath, listening to us. Then, a new sound. A low, guttural growl, rumbling through the darkness. It wasn't like any animal growl I'd ever heard. Deeper, more resonant, with an undercurrent of something else. Something primal and hungry. Chris froze, his eyes wide in the flickering lamplight. Even he couldn't pretend it was just the wind now. The growl came again, closer this time, right outside the tent. The nylon walls seemed flimsy and inadequate, like they wouldn't offer even a section of protection against whatever was making that sound. Okay, Chris said, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, maybe that's not a squirrel. He reached slowly for the pocket knife he kept on his belt, like that was going to help against whatever was out there. The tent fabric rustled again, but this time it wasn't the wind. Something was brushing against the side, something heavy. The scratching started again, closer, louder, right next to my head. I could feel my breath catching in my throat, a cold dread creeping up my spine. Then the scratching stopped again, and the growling started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a growl anymore. It was a voice. Distorted, guttural, like rocks grinding together, but undeniably a voice. And it was speaking. I couldn't make out the words, not at first. It was too low, too garbled, like it was speaking a language I wasn't meant to understand. But as it repeated the phrase, over and over, a chilling clarity began to dawn. The voice, that monstrous, gravelly voice, was saying, "Get out, get out, get out." It was right outside the tent now, just inches away. I could feel the vibrations of the voice through the ground, through the thin nylon vibrating in my bones. Get out, that get out you." Chris and I stared at each other, paralyzed with fear. His face was pale, his eyes wide and terrified. Mine, I'm sure, was no better. We were trapped, huddled together in our flimsy tent, while something monstrous circled us in the darkness, its voice a chilling promise of what was to come. Get out, get out, get out. The voice was relentless, pressing in on us, suffocating us with dread. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence descended again, heavier than before. But this time, it wasn't the expectant silence of something listening. It was the silence of something waiting. Waiting for us to get out. The silence after the voice stopped was deafening. It pressed in on us, thick and suffocating, heavier than the darkness, heavier than the fear. We stayed frozen, hardly daring to breathe, listening for any sign of movement outside the tent. Nothing, just the wind sighing through the trees, now sounding less like nature and more like a mournful whisper. What was that? I stammered finally, my voice cracking. Chris shook his head, his eyes darting around the tent as if expecting the creature to burst through the fabric at any moment. Some kind of animal. But that voice, he trailed off, unable to articulate the sheer wrongness of what we just heard. "Animal doesn't talk, Chris," I said, stating the obvious, but needing to hear the words out loud to make them feel even slightly real. That thing spoke. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yeah, it did. He was pale as a ghost, sweat beading on his forehead even in the cold night air. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, huddled together in the cramped tent, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive quiet. Maybe it's gone. Chris whispered hopefully after a while. Maybe it was just trying to scare us off. I wanted to believe him desperately, but a cold knot of dread in my stomach told me otherwise. "I don't think so," I said, my voice barely audible. It felt like a warning, like it wanted us to leave. "So should we?" Chris asked, his eyes pleading. "Should we just pack up and get out of here, now?" The thought was tempting, incredibly so. To just tear down the tent, grab our packs, and run blindly through the woods, away from that voice, away from whatever was out there. But something held me back. A sliver of rationality, maybe, or just plain stubbornness. "We can't," I said, my voice firmer now, surprising even myself. "It's too dark. We'd be lost in minutes. And if that thing is still out there..." I didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what "if it's still out there" meant. Chris nodded slowly, reluctantly. "Yeah, you're right. Damn it." He ran a hand through his hair, his usual bravado completely gone, replaced by raw fear. We need to stay put." I continued, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Stay quiet. Maybe it'll lose interest and go away." It was a flimsy plan, I knew, but it was all we had. We turned off our headlamps, plunging the tent into absolute darkness. It felt marginally safer that way, hidden in the blackness, though I knew it was just an illusion. Whatever was out there could probably see us just fine. We sat in silence again, straining our ears. Our senses stretched to the breaking point. The forest sounds seemed to press in closer, mocking our attempts at concealment. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, unfamiliar scent. Something musky, earthy, with a hint of decay. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, lingering in the air, adding another layer of unease to the already suffocating atmosphere. Time stretched, each second feeling like an hour. My muscles ached from tension, my eyes burned from staring into the darkness. Chris shifted beside me, a restless energy radiating off him despite his fear. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take the silence anymore, it happened. A sound. So faint at first I almost dismissed it as my imagination. A soft padding, like bare feet on soft earth, coming closer. I nudged Chris, pointing towards the sound. He heard it too. His eyes widened again, reflecting the faint starlight filtering through the tent fabric. The padding grew louder, closer, circling the tent again. This time it wasn't just scratching. This time it was sniffing. Wet, snuffling sounds right outside the tent wall, like a dog trying to get at something inside. But this was no dog. This was something else. Something that spoke. Something that hunted in the darkness. The sniffing intensified, moving around the tent, closer and closer. It paused right outside the entrance, just inches from the zipper. I could practically feel its breath on the other side of the nylon. Then a new sound. A wet, slobbering sound, followed by a low growl that vibrated through the ground. And then the unmistakable sound of teeth snapping inches from my face. It was trying to get in. It was right there outside the tent, and it was trying to tear its way inside. Panic surged through me, a cold, paralyzing wave. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I was frozen, trapped by fear, trapped in the darkness, trapped in this flimsy tent, with something monstrous trying to get in. The snapping continued, more frantic now, tearing at the nylon, ripping at the seams. The tent shook violently, threatening to collapse around us. Chris and I scrambled back, pressing ourselves against the rear wall, as far away from the entrance as we could get. The fabric ripped. A long, jagged tear appeared in the tent wall, right by the zipper. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it that musky, decaying scent, now much stronger, much more nauseating. And then through the tear I saw it, just a glimpse at first in the darkness. Something dark, massive, blocking out the faint starlight. Something hairy. And then 2 points of light, burning yellow in the darkness, fixing on us like headlights in the night, eyes. It was looking at us, staring right into the tent, right at us with those burning yellow eyes. And then, slowly, deliberately, it started to push its way inside. Those yellow eyes in the darkness, I'll never forget them. Burning, predatory, utterly devoid of humanity. They were fixed on us, and in them I saw nothing but hunger. The tear in the tent widened as something massive forced its way through. The nylon ripped and groaned, the tent poles bending and snapping under the strain. Chris and I scrambled further back, pressed against the cold, damp ground, our headlamps casting wild, erratic beams as we tried to get a better look at our attacker. It was huge. Taller than any man, broader than a bear, with thick, matted for the color of shadow. Its head was vaguely canine, with a long snout and powerful jaws filled with rows of teeth that looked like they could tear through bone. And those eyes, those terrifying yellow eyes, glowing in the darkness, fixed on us with predatory intent. A wave of nausea washed over me, a mix of fear and the overwhelming stench of decay that emanated from the creature. It pushed further into the tent, its massive form filling the small space, leaving us trapped and cornered. Chris, the knife, I yelled, my voice barely a croak, was a pathetic weapon against something like this, but it was all we had. Chris fumbled for his pocket knife, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He managed to flick it open, the small blade glinting uselessly in the lamplight. The creature growled again, that guttural bone, chilling sound, and took a step closer. We were trapped, pinned against the back of the tent, with nowhere to go. Get out. The gravelly voice rasped again, closer now, right in our faces. Get out, you don't belong here, it lunged. Not with a roar, but with a terrifyingly swift, silent movement. Its massive paw shot out, claws extended, raking across the tent fabric, tearing through the nylon like paper. I threw my arm up to shield my face, bracing for the impact, for the teeth, for the claws, but it didn't come. Not immediately. Instead, the creature paused, its head inches from mine, its hot, fetid breath washing over me. It sniffed, its wet snout twitching, and then it spoke again. Leave, no. The voice was clearer this time, the distorted words somehow even more terrifying than the growls. It was giving us a chance to escape. My mind, paralyzed by fear just moments before, suddenly snapped into sharp, desperate focus. Escape. That was the only option. Fight was suicide. Hide was impossible. We had to run. Frizz. I hissed, shoving him hard. Run. Now? He didn't need telling twice. He scrambled to his feet, knocking over the lantern, plunging the tent into near darkness again. We lunged for the ripped opening, scrambling over each other, desperate to get out of that nylon death trap. I burst out of the tent and into the night, Chris right behind me. We didn't stop to think, didn't stop to look back. We just ran. Ran blindly into the darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at our faces, adrenaline pumping through our veins. Behind us, I heard a roar. Not the guttural growl from before, but a full-throated and rage bellow that shook the very trees. It was coming after us. We ran as fast as we could, our headlamps bouncing wildly, illuminating fleeting glimpses of the forest rushing past. The creature was faster, though. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind us, gaining ground with terrifying speed. Split up, I yelled, gasping for breath. Maybe it can't track both of us. It was another desperate gamble, but we were out of options. Chris hesitated for a split second, then nodded, veering off to the left, disappearing into the trees. I kept running straight ahead, hoping, praying, that the creature would follow him and not me. The sounds of pursuit split. Part of the crashing moving to the left, following Chris, the other part impossibly, still behind me. It had split up too. It was hunting us both. I ran until my lungs burned, my legs ached, my vision blurred. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. Just away. Away from the growls, away from the eyes, away from the monstrous thing that was hunting us. But it was no use. It was too fast, too strong, too relentless. I could hear it gaining on me, the heavy padding of its feet closing the distance. I glanced back, a foolish, terrified mistake, and saw it. Looming out of the darkness, a hulking shadow against the trees, those yellow eyes burning like twin embers. It was gaining on me fast. Too fast. I tripped, stumbling over a root, and went down hard, sprawling on the ground. The air rushed out of my lungs, and for a moment I just lay there, stunned, unable to move. The creature was on me in an instant, towering over me, blocking out the faint starlight. I looked up into those yellow eyes, knowing this was it. This was the end. It lowered its head, its snout inches from my face, and growled again that guttural, terrifying sound. Get out. But this time it'd say, "Jet out to the forest," said it to me. Get out and don't come back. Then it was gone, just like that. One moment it was there, looming over me, the next nothing. Silence, except for my own ragged breathing. I lay there for a long time, not daring to move, not daring to breathe, waiting for it to come back, waiting for the attack, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Slowly, tentatively, I sat up. The forest was silent again, eerily so. The creature was gone, vanished into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. I was alone utterly, terrifyingly alone. I don't know how long I sat there, huddled on the forest floor, shaking, weeping, trying to understand what had just happened. Eventually, the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky a pale gray. And with the returning light, a sliver of hope, or maybe just desperation flickered within me. I had to get out of here. I had to try to find Chris. Even though deep down I knew I was alone. I stood up, my legs shaky and weak, and started walking, not running this time, just walking. Towards the east, towards the faint promise of dawn, towards I didn't know what, safety. Civilization, or just more wilderness, more darkness, more of whatever hunted us in the night. I walked for hours, until the sun was fully up, painting the redwoods in golden light. I called out for Chris, my voice hoarse and weak, but only the wind answered. I followed the trail, retracing our steps from the day before, hoping against hope to find him, to find some sign of him. But there was nothing. No Chris, no sign of the creature, just the silent, indifferent forest and the lingering scent of decay on the morning air. I made it back to my Jeep somehow. Drove out of the park, never looking back. I called the park rangers, told them a garbled story about getting lost, about my friend being missing. They started a search, of course. But I knew they wouldn't find anything. Not Chris. Not the creature. Just the silent, watchful redwoods guarding their secrets. They say Redwood National Park is beautiful, serene. A place to commune with nature. Maybe it is. But I know something else lurks there, in the shadows, beneath the towering trees. Something ancient, something hungry. Something that speaks in a voice of stone and shadow, warning you to get out. And don't come back. And never again. I'll stick to beaches and we fight from now on. The wilderness is not for us. Some places are best left undisturbed. Some voices are best left unanswered. And some things are best left in the darkness. I signed up to be a park ranger thinking it would be all peaceful days, wandering trails, helping lost hikers, just soaking in nature. But this place was something else entirely. It wasn't on any official map, and its name, forget about it, didn't show up anywhere, not even in some joke book. When the job offer came through, the instructions were crystal clear. Don't talk about the forest to outsiders, don't ask questions, and above all else, follow the rules. Right from the start, things felt off. This forest wasn't natural. The trees were way too tall, their trunks all twisted and black, like they'd been through a fire but never actually burned down. And the wildlife, don't even get me started. Some of the animals had eyes that glowed in the dark, and their calls sometimes they sounded almost human. Creepy, right? My first day, my supervisor introduced me to this businessman from Ashen Blade Industries, Mr. Thorne. He handed me a laminated card with the rules printed on it, this weird smile plastered on his face. The ink on the card looked brand new, like they were rewriting these rules all the time. You break the rules. Thorne said, all serious, you won't last the night, understand? I nodded, but honestly, I didn't get it. Not then. The card had 8 rules, plain and simple. Rule 1. Stay on the marked trails between sunset and sunrise. Straying even a single step into the brush after dark is basically a death wish. Rule 2. If you're a kid crying, ignore it. Seriously. Do not approach. Don't try to be a hero. Cover your ears and just keep moving. Rule 3. If the forest suddenly goes silent, find a tree with carvings on it. Stand right under it and wait for the sounds to come back. And whatever you do, don't look up. Rule 4. Stay away from the northern ridge after dark. Something hangs out in the tree line up there, and it really doesn't like being watched. Rule 5. If you see a deer with antlers that spiral like corkscrews, don't make eye contact. And if it starts following you, run like hell. Rule 6. The lake in the middle of the forest is safe enough during the day, but after dark, stay at least 50 feet from the shoreline. No exceptions. Rule 7. If you hear your name whispered, don't answer. It's not who you think it is. Rule 8. Lights in the trees. Turn around and get out of there fast. They're definitely not fireflies. At first, I thought the rules were some kind of joke, a way to mess with the new guy. But there was something about the forest itself that made me uneasy from day one. The trees were massive, towering over everything, their branches all gnarled and twisted, reaching up like claws. The trails were covered in mossy rocks, and some of the trees had these weird carvings on them, symbols I couldn't even recognize. During the day, it was quiet. Too quiet. No birds singing, no buzzing insects, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. But when dusk started to settle, the air got colder, and the shadows stretched way out. I made sure to stick to the trail, just like Rule 1 said. Then, one night around 9 p.m., the forest went dead silent. I froze in my tracks, heart pounding. My own breathing sounded crazy loud in the sudden stillness. Rule 3 flashed in my mind: find a carved tree, stand under it, don't look up. I scanned the trees, freaking out a little, and spotted one of the marked trunks maybe 20 feet away. The carvings there looked ancient, deeper, almost glowing in the dark. I backed up against the tree, gripped my flashlight tight, and just waited. The silence dragged on forever. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard it to the soft crunch of footsteps on leaves. My jaw clenched. Don't look up, don't look up. The footsteps got louder, closer, until they stopped right behind me. My breath hitched. I could feel something there, looming over me, heavy and suffocating. The air around me turned ice cold, and I heard a faint rustle of fabric, like someone shifting their weight. Then slowly, the forest sounds came back. Birds chirped in the distance, the wind rustled the leaves again. Whatever had been there was gone. I didn't move until my shift ended at dawn. The second night started quiet enough. I stuck to the trails, keeping my flashlight beam low. Around midnight, I saw something moving through the trees ahead. At first, I thought it was another hiker, a figure with long limbs, moving all jerky and uneven. Hello. I called out, breaking protocol. My voice echoed in the forest, but the figure didn't answer. I stepped closer, shining my light on it. It stopped moving, head tilting to the side in this unnatural way. And then, bam, the forest went completely dark. My flashlight died, just flickered out, and these faint green lights started popping up in the treetops. At first, they looked like fireflies, small orbs of light drifting between the branches. But as they got closer, I realized they weren't fireflies at all. These lights didn't flicker, they pulsed like tiny beating hearts. And they weren't random, they were coming right at me. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face and arms as I sprinted down the trail. The lights followed, their glow getting brighter, closer. By the time I reached the ranger station, my legs were burning, lungs about to explode. I slammed the door shut, locked it tight. The lights hovered just outside the windows, their pulsing glow like a warning in the darkness. Every night in that forest was worse than the last. The rules kept me alive, sure, but they didn't make me feel safe. Something was out there, watching me, lurking just off the trails, waiting for me to mess up. I started seeing patterns. The same symbols carved into the trees kept showing up near the areas where the rules were the strictest. The northern ridge, especially, seemed to hum with this weird energy, like the forest itself was alive. Then one night, I found a scrap of paper tucked in the desk drawer at the station. It wasn't part of the laminated rules, but it was written in the same handwriting. It said, "The rules aren't just to keep you safe. They're to keep it contained." I didn't know what it was. But every time I stepped into that forest, I felt like I was one wrong move away from finding out. The third night kicked off, just like the others, quiet, cold, and seriously tense. I kept my flashlight beam low as I walked the marked trails, just repeating the rules in my head over and over. By then, they were burned into my brain, each one feeling like a lifeline in this weird, hostile place. It was a little after 1 a.m. when I heard a kid crying. The sound was faint at first, carried on the wind, like some distant echo. But as I walked further down the trail, it got louder, more clear. This high-pitched wail, just full of desperation and fear. I froze solid. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and run. Then Rule 2 popped into my head. If you hear a child crying, do not approach. Do not try to help. Cover your ears and keep walking. But the crying didn't feel distant anymore. It was close. So close I could almost hear the ragged breaths between the sobs. "Help me," the voice called, breaking into this heart-wrenching sob. My fists clenched up tight. I forced my feet to keep moving, heart hammering in my chest. I jammed my hands over my ears, staring straight ahead. "Please," wailed. The voice whined, "Don't leave me." It was unbearable. Every step I took felt like some kind of betrayal. I'd spent years as a ranger protecting people, guiding lost hikers to safety. Ignoring this cry felt wrong. Inhuman even. But I kept walking. The crying went on, getting more frantic. "Don't go." It screamed, the voice cracking with desperation. "Please, it's coming for me." And that's when my resolve just crumbled. I stopped. My hands slipped from my ears as the sobs turned into this faint, pitiful whimper. Against every rule, every instinct for self-preservation, I turned around. The trail behind me was empty. No kid, no footprints in the dirt. Just the faint green glow of the forest and those towering, twisted trees. For a second, I thought maybe the voice had stopped. Then I heard it again. Softer now, but closer. "Help me," whispered. The sound was coming from the brush just off the trail. My flashlight beam flickered as I stepped closer, scanning the undergrowth. "Hello." I called out, voice shaking. Something moved in the bushes, rustling the leaves. And then this small figure stepped out. A girl. No older than 8, maybe. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and her eyes wide and scared, locked right onto mine. "Please," she whispered, voice barely there. "It's gonna get me." I took another step towards her, lowering my flashlight. "You're safe now," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "I'll get you out of here." Her lips trembled, and for a split second, I thought she was gonna start crying again. But then her face twisted into something else. This cruel, inhuman grin that stretched way too wide. Her eyes went black, and her voice dropped, turning into this guttural growl. "You shouldn't have stopped." And then it lunged, movements all jerky and unnatural. I stumbled back, barely managed to raise my rifle. The creature didn't scream, but the forest did. This deafening, messed up cacophony of distorted cries and howls just erupted all around us, echoing through the trees. My flashlight went crazy, flickering, casting these wild, erratic shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. I fired a shot. The crack of the rifle cut through the noise for a second, but it didn't stop the creature. It flinched, that grin faltering for a moment, but it kept coming. I turned and ran, sprinting down the trail as the sound of its uneven footsteps followed right behind me. The green glow of the forest got even brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat, and the air turned colder with every step. I finally reached a marked tree, just threw myself against it, chest heaving. The forest went silent again. I didn't dare move. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the rifle. Eyes locked on the trail ahead. Then the creature appeared at the edge of the trail, body all twisted and twitching. It just stared at me with those black, empty eyes, head tilted like it was waiting for something. Something the symbols carved into the tree started to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, casting these weird patterns across the ground. The creature hissed, that grin twisting into a snarl, and then it just turned and disappeared back into the darkness. The forest stayed silent for a long time after that. I didn't tell my supervisor about what happened that night. What was I supposed to say? That I almost got killed because I broke the rules, because I was too weak to ignore the sound of a crying kid. The laminated rule card in my pocket felt heavier now, a constant reminder of my screw up. The fourth night was even colder than the others, and that green glow in the forest, it seemed brighter, more alive. The air itself was buzzing with static, and I swear I could feel eyes on me everywhere I went, even when I couldn't see anything. I stayed clear of the northern ridge, just like the rules said, but that hum that always seemed to come from that direction, it was louder tonight, almost like it was calling to me. That laminated rule card was starting to get worn out, the edges frayed. The ink was smudged from me pulling it out and rereading it a million times, like maybe it would suddenly reveal some hidden secret. Rule 4 had been stuck in my head all day: avoid the northern ridge after dark. Something watches from the tree line, and it doesn't like to be seen. But what about during the day? I'd spent my first few shifts just avoiding the ridge altogether, keeping my distance from that looming presence. But after my run in with the crying kid, or whatever that was, I started feeling like the rules weren't just there to protect me. Like they were deliberately keeping something hidden. And the ridge it was calling to me in a way the rest of the forest just didn't. The air felt heavier near it, the hum deeper, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I told myself it was just curiosity that was pulling me towards the ridge as day fordawned. But deep down, maybe it was defiance. By midday, the ridge was right in front of me. The trees up here were different, no doubt about it. Taller, blacker, like they'd been scorched by fire. Their branches clawed at the sky, all gnarled and twisted. The ground under my boots felt soft, like it had been churned up recently, and patches of moss glowed faintly even in the daylight. The air got colder as I climbed, that hum growing louder with every step. When I finally reached the top, I stopped, just scanned the tree line. The forest stretched out below me, endless, a sea of dark green and black. But something about the ridge itself felt off. The trees here stood unnaturally still, their leaves not moving at all, even though there was a breeze. Shadows clung to their bases, darker and deeper than they should have been in broad daylight. Right in the center of the ridge was a clearing, empty, except for this circle of stones arranged in a pattern I didn't recognize. I stepped closer. As I got nearer to the stones, I noticed something really weird. The shadows cast by the rocks. They didn't match the rocks' shapes. They were long and sharp, forming these jagged patterns that seemed to move even though the stones themselves were still. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, just at the edge of my hearing, too soft to make out any words. It was coming from the tree line, weaving through that constant hum, like a thread pulling at my thoughts. "Hello," I called out, instantly regretting it. My voice sounded small, swallowed up by the stillness. The whisper stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath, and I felt it again, that weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. It wasn't human. This thing was tall, impossibly thin, its body wrapped in what looked like layers of shadows that just shifted and flickered like smoke. Its head was tilted at this crazy angle, and even though it didn't have a face, I could feel it watching me. I froze, breath caught in my throat. My rifle suddenly felt useless in my hands. The figure stepped forward, movement slow, deliberate. It didn't walk, exactly. more like glided. Its feet never seemed to touch the ground. I backed away, but my foot caught on one of the stones, and I stumbled right into the center of the circle. The air around me changed instantly. That faint green glow of the forest turned into this deep, pulsing red. The figure stopped at the edge of the circle, body twisting and contorting like it was testing some kind of boundary. And then the whispers came back, louder now, overlapping voices that spoke words I couldn't understand. They just poured into my mind, each one like a needle driving deeper into my skull. The figure raised one long, shadowy arm and pointed right at me. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. The whispers got louder, more insistent, and the shadows at the edge of the circle started to move, creeping towards me like they were alive. I just ran. Man, I ran. Didn't even know where I was going, just away. The hum followed me, growing fainter with every step, but the whispers, they didn't stop. They clung to me, echoing in my mind like a broken record. When I finally reached the base of the ridge, I just collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. The forest around me was quiet again, but the air still felt heavy, charged with static. I pulled out that laminated card, hands still shaking. The rules just stared back at me, stark and unyielding. Rule 4, avoid the northern ridge after dark. Something watches from the tree line, and it doesn't like to be seen. I'd broken the rule during the day, and had still found me. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go back into the forest. I stayed locked in the ranger station, watching the tree line from the safety of the window. But the forest it didn't forget. Around midnight, the lights in the station flickered, and the air turned ice cold. The whispers came back, faint at first, then louder, rising to this deafening crescendo. When I looked outside, I saw them, shadows moving between the trees, their shapes all twisted and wrong. They didn't step onto the trail, but they didn't need to. They were just waiting for me to break another rule. The whispers didn't stop, not even after the shadows vanished from the tree line and the lights in the station flickered back to normal. They just lingered, these soft, overlapping voices, scratching at the edges of my thoughts. During the day, they were faint, just low enough to make me wonder if I was imagining them. But at night, they got louder, impossible to ignore. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure from the ridge, elongated limbs, faceless head tilted, like it was just waiting for me to come back. The weight of its gaze that followed me everywhere, even in broad daylight. In the forest, it didn't feel the same anymore. The hum was different now, sharper, angrier. That green glow that seeped through the grates at night, it pulsed faster, rhythm all uneven, like a heart that couldn't settle down. Even the marked trees, the ones I used to find some comfort in, now seemed to loom over me, their carved symbols twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. It happened 3 nights after I broke Rule 4. I was patrolling the southern trail near the lake when the whispers came back, louder than ever. They weren't faint anymore. They were inside my head, burrowing in my thoughts like insects. You shouldn't have gone there. The words weren't clear at first, buried in the mess of voices, but as I walked, they started to take shape, repeating over and over until they drowned out everything else. You shouldn't have gone there. I froze in the middle of the trail, gripping my rifle so tight my knuckles went white. My flashlight flickered, the beam cutting all erratically through the darkness. The forest around me was silent, eerily so. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. For a second, everything seemed normal. Then I saw it. A shadow long and thin standing just beyond the edge of the trail. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But I knew it was watching me. Stay back, I whispered, voice trembling. The shadow tilted its head, that same slow, deliberate movement. My flashlight flickered again, and in that split second of darkness, it was gone. The next morning, I noticed something strange. I was in the ranger station bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, when I caught a glimpse of my reflection. At first, I thought it was just the shadows under my eyes, dark circles from too many sleepless nights. But when I looked closer, I saw it, a faint black mark just above my collarbone. It wasn't a bruise, wasn't dirt. The mark was sharp and angular, just like the carvings on the trees. I scrubbed at it, furious, but didn't budge. Didn't even hurt. If anything, it felt cold, like it wasn't even part of me. The whispers came back that night, louder than ever. The following night, I just gave up on the trails completely. I stayed locked in the ranger station, clutching my rifle like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Watching the tree line through the window. The shadows returned just after midnight. They moved slowly, gliding between the trees with that same unnatural grace as the figure on the ridge. There were more of them now. Dozens, maybe more, and they were getting closer. The whispers scratched at my mind, growing louder with every passing minute. My head throbbed, vision blurring as the voices overlapped, repeating the same phrase over and over. You broke the rules. You broke the rules. You broke the rules. The shadows stopped just beyond the edge of the clearing around the station. For a moment, everything went still. Then, one by one, the lights in the station began to flicker. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in the air as I backed into a corner, gripping the rifle so tight my hands ached. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. And then I saw it, the shadow from the ridge. It stood in the center of the clearing, taller and darker than the others, its faceless head tilted towards the station. The shadows around it seemed to ripple and bend towards it, like they were drawn to its presence. It raised one long, jagged arm and pointed right at the window. The glass began to crack, then fractures spreading outward like spider webs. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the laminated rules card from the desk and ran, bursting out the back door and into the forest. The forest was alive. The hum was deafening, vibrating through my bones with every step. The green glow pulsed erratically, casting twisted shadows that danced across the trees. The whispers returned, screaming in my head like 1,000 voices all shouting at once. Behind me, the shadows followed. I could hear them moving through the trees, their distorted shapes flickering at the edges of my vision. The figure from the ridge loomed just behind them, elongated limbs stretched out unnaturally as it glided closer. I ran blindly, lungs burning, legs threatening to give out. The rules card was clenched tight in my fist, the edges cutting into my palm. I didn't stop until I reached one of the marked trees. The tree's carvings glowed faintly as I collapsed at its base, pressing my back against the trunk. The shadows stopped just beyond the tree's glow, writhing and shifting, as though they were held back by some invisible barrier. The figure from the ridge stood among them, head tilted in that unnatural way. The whispers stopped, and the hum faded into silence. The figure raised its arm again, pointing directly at me. For a moment, I thought it would step closer. But then it lowered its arm, and the shadows began to retreat, melting back in the forest. The figure was the last to leave. It lingered at the edge of the tree glow, tilting one final time before it disappeared into the darkness. When I finally made it back to the station, the black mark on my collarbone had spread. It now stretched across my chest in jagged, angular lines, pulsing faintly with a cold green light. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing for certain: the forest hadn't forgiven me. And it never would. The mark was cold like frost had seeped into my skin. It stretched across my chest in jagged, unnatural patterns, pulsing faintly with that sickly green light. No amount of scrubbing could remove it. I tried water, soap, even a knife in a moment of desperation, but the lines remained unyielding and unchanging. At first, it seemed harmless. Didn't hurt, didn't itch or sting, but I could feel it growing, not just across my body, but inside me. I started waking up in strange places, far from the ranger station, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. My thoughts were harder to hold on to, like they were slipping through my fingers. The forest was in my dreams now, twisting trees, glowing lights, and that figure from the ridge, always watching. The whispers followed me into sleep, weaving through my mind like vines, choking out any peace I might have found. The forest itself became stranger after the mark appeared. The trails I'd walked 100 times didn't lead where they should. I'd turn a corner expecting the lake and find the ridge instead. The trees seemed to move when I wasn't looking, their gnarled branches bending and twisting into shapes that resembled faces. The animals weren't the same either. The deer's antlers spiraled more sharply, and their glowing eyes lingered on me longer than before. Birds perched silently on branches, heads cocked at unnatural angles, watching. The rules, they still worked for now, but they felt thinner, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. I wasn't sure how much longer they would protect me. One morning, my supervisor arrived unannounced at the station. His face was pale, eyes hard. He looked at the mark on my chest without asking and nodded grimly, like he'd seen it all before. "You've been touched by the forest," he said, voice flat, devoid of any sympathy. "It happens to those who break the rules." "What does it mean?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a fresh laminated card and slid it across the desk towards me. The rules were the same, all 8 of them. But at the bottom, a new line had been added, Rule 9. The mark "Do not leave." I stared at the words, stomachs turning. "What happens if I leave?" I asked. He gave me this long, measured look. "You won't make it past the tree line." The mark grew worse as the days passed. The green light pulsed brighter, and I started hearing the hum of the forest even when I wasn't inside it. It followed me into the station, into my thoughts. One night, I woke up standing in the clearing on the ridge, the circle of stones glowing faintly beneath my feet. I didn't remember walking there. My flashlight and rifle were gone, left behind at the station. The figure from the ridge was there, waiting just beyond the tree line. "You're part of it now," it whispered, voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You belong to us." I ran, but the forest didn't let me go. Every path led me back to the ridge, the stones brighter with each return. The shadows followed me closer now, their shapes flickering at the edges of my vision even during the day. The animals watched me with glowing eyes, their movements eerily synchronized, like they were part of something larger. On my final night in the forest, the whispers were deafening, the hum a roar, the green glow pulsing like a heartbeat. The laminated rules card sat on the desk in front of me, edges frayed from use, the words blurred and shifted. And for the first time, I saw them for what they really were, warnings. Not just for survival, but to keep something contained. The mark on my chest burned cold, spreading across my arms and neck like vines. I could feel it pulling me, dragging me towards the ridge, towards the stones. I fought it for hours, clutching my rifle like it might anchor me. But my body wasn't mine anymore. At midnight, I stepped out of the station. The forest was alive with light, green, pulsating, unnatural. Shadows twisted and danced, their shapes forming a path that led straight to the ridge. The figure was waiting in the clearing, its form larger now, more defined. The tendrils of its shadow reached out to me as I stepped into the circle of stones. The whispers stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the stones began to glow brighter, and the hum grew louder, resonating through my bones. The figure tilted its head, and the mark on my chest flared with cold, searing light. My vision blurred as the ground beneath me cracked and split, a green rift opening where the stones had been. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the forest itself, bending toward the rift, its trees twisting and reaching. As though they were feeding it, I woke up in the forest. But it wasn't the same forest I knew. The trees were darker, the sky a deep, endless green. The trails were gone, replaced by winding paths that shifted as I walked. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I looked down and saw the mark, now covering my entire body, glowing faintly in the dark. In the distance, I saw lights flickering between the trees. Not fireflies, but shadows that glided through the forest like living things. I wasn't a ranger anymore. I was one of them. And the forest wasn't just a place. It was a prison, a living, breathing entity that had claimed me as its own. Now I wander its paths, watching and waiting, just as the shadows had watched me. When the next ranger arrives, I'll be there, standing at the edge of the tree line, waiting for them to break the rules. Because the forest, it never lets you leave.